You know where they are. Yes, sir.
This is Appetite for Distortion.
Welcome to the podcast, Appetite for Distortion, episode number 278. My name is Brando. Another episode you can watch on our YouTube channel as we do Zoom, as we continue to feel our quarantine as I'm in Queens. Steve Darrow, where are you? You look like you're in a cave somewhere.
I am, but it's in Hollywood, California cave.
Oh, I can't believe it's taken 278 episodes for me to finally get to speak with you, somebody who literally the roots of Guns N' Roses. So before I forget it, let me just thank Richard Beinstock, the author, for connecting us. So Steve, thank you so much for your time and joining me today.
Yeah, it's about time.
You have a very Jerry Cantrell look. I had no idea. I'm like, what is Steve? Because especially when you see pictures of guys in the 80s, I'm like, what do they look like now?
Yeah,
obviously nobody looks the same. I'm like, oh, am I interviewing Jerry Cantrell? What's going on here?
Yeah. Last picture I saw of him, he had a little gray thing going here too. So it's what happens.
Are you LA born and raised? Is that where you're from? Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I also 278 episodes of doing a Guns N' Roses podcast and talking about that scene. I have yet to go out to the West Coast.
Oh,
I am.
Well, if you look, like, for example, basically where I am right now and where I've been for the last 30 plus years is, if you look at Mark Canner's Reckless Road book, there was like a map that said the jungle.
Yeah.
And it was a visual, almost like a Monopoly game of like all the clubs and all the rehearsal places and the recording studios and the hangouts from the hot places in Hollywood. I'm like kind of smack dab in the middle of that.
Okay.
Like I'm a block from what was that little miniature rehearsal studio that they all moved into, that they had a wacky name for it. It was like the Gardner Street Hotel and Suites, which was their sarcastic word for a room that was about 12 by 12, and all of them lived with their equipment.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you the question of how was the Sunset Strip in the 80s. I'm not going to ask.
Cool.
It was cool. I know. I want to relive it, not just by asking those a generic question, but getting to know you. What kind of kid were you, and what influenced you to go along this path? What was little Steven like? Not the Bruce Springsteen, not the
Disciples of Rock.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you go back, it starts with my family, who's all musicians and artists as well. And my dad, so raised, born in the 60s, so raised going to concerts and love-ins and recording studios with my dad and his bands. And he was started out in the folk boom of like the early 60s and the surf music, and then got into electric rock, garage bands, and that led into psychedelia. Then he ended up being in a couple bands in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, when I was just born.
Well, that's cool that your dad was in psychedelic bands.
Yeah. And then he was in a band called the Kaleidoscope in the 60s.
Of course.
And another member of the Kaleidoscope, David Lindley, married my dad's sister.
Okay.
So he became my uncle. And so they were both basically, living in the same town. And I was kind of bounced back and forth between growing up in their households, both of them. And so I was always around, was tripping on cords when I was a little kid, and gear everywhere, and weird people coming over. And sort of similar to like, if you've, I didn't ever talk to him much about it until recent years, but I mean, Slash kind of has the same upbringing a little bit, just with, because his mother was in the sort of rock clothing designer world,
the David Bowie world, and
yeah,
you're just surrounded by it, right? It's
and he was like in the thick of things in like Laurel Canyon and Hollywood, and I was in the thick of things like, out like in the suburbs of Hollywood, and was anyway. So basically, I grew up with up until I was about 11 or 12, I was the stuff that my parents were into went from psychedelia quickly into like the super mellow, laid back California.
Okay.
70s, early 70s singer-songwriter sound. And both my dad and my uncle went off to be kind of well-known, or not well-known, but sought-after sidemen, musicians for those people, like in the studio. Like my dad played on the first James Taylor record.
Oh, wow.
And my uncle went on to play with Jackson Browne and Linda Ronstadt and Crosby and Nash and, blah, blah, blah. And then then once they got into the later 70s, the 80s, they had their own solo albums. So,
oh, wow.
So I was kind of, weaned on psychedelia and stuff. But then once I got to where I was, adolescent, I was like, this is just so, no. And I was like, ready to like a 12-year-old kid wants to do. So I got into surfing and skateboarding and motocross, and then that quickly led into punk rock,
Okay.
And I was in a band in junior high school by the time, I started playing drums, which is what I started out playing. And no one in the family played drums either. Everyone played everything else.
So
like,
is that why you chose the drums? Like, because nobody
in
else?
A way, I think in a way it was just that, and B, it was that was that, because my father was known as like, I'm the guy who could play anything with strings. I could play mandolin, I could play ukulele, I could play banjo, I could play guitar and bass, blah, 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 blah. There was a drum set in the house for drummers to come and play when they'd record, but I think that meets the fact that it was like something to do when you were a kid.
Get your aggression out?
Yeah, like Bam Bam or Animal from the Muppets or something.
Sure.
And so I kind of caught on real quick. And then my friends that I was growing up with, they one of them went to England on a vacation with his parents in 1977 or something during the Jubilee, and came back with all these tales of this thing, punk rock, which was, huge over there, but still here was like creepy, just you had to really be dialed in to know about it. And so we just kind of went with sort of teenage abandon into just getting into anything that was like that, high energy and crazy, and not the norm.
Who were your favorite bands, and what was the age like when you saw your first concert? Like for me, it's obviously we're different eras. I guess if you want to count a real band first concert, Eve 6. However,
what was it?
Eve 6. Remember that band, Eve 6? They had like some big hits in the 90s. Inside Out, My Heart Is in a Blender, Twist.
Yeah,
that was my first. However, I like to say my first.
That's almost like in the Third Eye Blind level.
Yes, yeah, kind of the same era.
Seven Mary 3.
Or does this earn me more cred? Because before that, when I was younger at Radio City Music Hall, I saw the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when they did they did their tour, coming out of their shells tour. If you look back in the videos, it's horrific, but it was great for.
I was there, man.
I was there, so I got to imagine you went to
we are from different eras, but it's kind of weird for me because, like I said, I was always getting dragged literally in a baby carriage or walking around to concerts with the parents.
Okay.
And I went, once was going to like shows in limousines, when my uncle would play at the Forum or something like that as a kid, just because it was something different. But I think the first bands that I really, actually tried to get tickets for and go to see and actually get a ride. It was before we could drive. We were old enough to drive, so it was, 13 or whatever. But it was like Iggy Pop and the Runaways and the Ramones and stuff like that, you know, around LA. And then there was a lot of club bands that were probably not really, you know, they're cult bands now looking at the past. It's like you had CBGBs and, you know, Mud Club and stuff like that in New York. We had clubs like that here that would just have the crazy local bands. So you'd get anybody from, you know, it'd be, you know, the Weirdos one night and Van Halen the next night. And, you know, a band like AC/DC's first, you know, US show at like the Whiskey the next night. And then, you know, Tom Petty and the Heartbreak, you know, so there's all this kind of stuff that was happening in like the late 70s, just on a club level, like not even forget like the big concerts and stuff, but just clubs. So we saw a lot of those crazy bands.
So when you're seeing, I mean, obviously you can't know the heights at Van Halen and AC/DC that, you know, how at that time, but you know, the energy, and that's what you're looking for, the adrenaline. So when you're going to concerts, whether you were, you know, carried in a stroller or you were buying it for the first time, you're buying it for yourself or however, did you think like, this is what I want to do with my life, like as a profession, or was it, or did it was just, you know, part of your family, and maybe did you have another goal, or was it like, hey, this I want to do
it was
that?
both, you know, both, to be
Okay.
honest. I mean, like I said, I probably, you know, like every little kid wants to grow up to be a baseball player or a soccer player or a
Sure.
professional skateboarder or something, or serial killer, or whatever they
Sure.
aspire to be. You know, and then like I said, I was pretty sporty for up until, you know, early high school, and it was like, no, I'm full on, I gotta go rock world, art world, you know, like. And you know, being into punk rock at that time, it was, you know, it became later on, it just became a uniform for disenfranchised jocks that were shaving their heads and just kicking people's asses that didn't look right. But that wasn't what when I was starting out, that it was all about at all. It was much more individual, and everyone was different, and everyone was crazy, and everyone was crazy in their own cool way. And high energy, but like you'd find your people, you'd find your tribe of people that were similar, and you could like pogo and, you know, jump around and maybe even throw a punch every once in a while, but it wasn't like the full on violent, like Black Flag, you know, hardcore post, you know, all that kind of stuff like it turned into. So and then, you know, of course, since it was such a weird time, like of our age, my age, same with the GN'R guys, most of them are around the same age. A couple of them are older, a couple of them are a tad younger. It was like still the 70s, and the 70s was still, you know, when you were a teenager, still all about heavy metal and, you know, stone, you know, getting stoned, like listening to Zeppelin, listening to Kiss, listening to Aerosmith, and then, or if you're a little bit more sensitive, you were into Peter Frampton or the Fleetwood Mac or disco if you were really messed up. So for me, it was like I was, even before I got bitten by the punk and stuff, I mean, I was listening to my dad's, you know, the heavier records in his collection, which was like Steppenwolf and Blue Cheer and Hendrix, and that kind of stuff. But then then I gravitated into Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and that stuff that kids, and then like if I was 12, the guys in high school who were a handful of years older than me were all listening to. And then punk rock hit, and it was so segmented back then. It was like, okay, well, you either got to choose. You can't like Sabbath and you can't like the Sex Pistols. You just can't. It's hard to explain now, but like back then it really was divided, like at least if you wanted any kind of cred from it.
Sure.
So it was hard, you know, especially growing up in that time and around when people were just, you know, you look at like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or a movie like that, you know, my school was basically those guys, you know, and then there was like the one, you know, they had the girl that had cultivated the Pat Benatar look, you know, and there was one of her, you know, and everyone was like, wow, who's that, you know. And then, but I had anyway, so
Were you the Spicoli? Were you?
I'm not so much Spicoli. I did go to school with him though, like full on Spicoli, like more. I lived in Orange County for a year with my dad, and down by the beach, and there was full on Spicoli, like, and his buddies. He had the red-haired friend, that they all wore shorts and puka shells. I mean, it was like totally legit. Like,
Wow.
and then if you want to watch another movie like Dazed and Confused,
Sure.
which almost everyone from any age group from 60 to 40 years old now could go, that was my high school. And it really was, even though it was set in Texas and it was set in 76, it was really like, you had the stoners and you had the jocks and you had the dreamers, like the kind of like, I forget the guy's name, but the guy was like this sort of anxious guy that was hanging around with the nerd kids and the girl with the red hair and I just want to dance, man. That guy.
Yeah.
It was those guys, and they became more like the people that I sort of hung out with once punk broke, because they went into the nerdy intellectual, way, because they fit in with that more, and then the other guys were just kicking ass and worrying about what they're gonna, what party they're gonna go to. Anyway, so it was really hard, and then but I had this sort of, I never shaved my head, I never had a mohawk, I always had basically like this, which gave me a lot of grief and through all the punk rock time, but I managed to stick it out and
all right,
got a lot of shit, but
I'm glad you still have it.
Yeah, like some people, like they were destined to be bald by the time they were in high school,
Yeah, I know.
They just got rid of it back then, and they kind of fit their look, but it really was divided. And then that's the weird thing about, like, sort of, if you fast forward to, when GN'R was getting together, when they were just called Rose, and before Hollywood Rose, even, like, kind of right when I met them, I was just coming out of playing in pretty underground punk goth like world, death rock, they called it. And I went to high school with like Roz, who was in Christian Death, our first bands together when I was 13 and he was 15. Before anything happened, we played like 1 or 2 gigs and that was it. But so I grew up with these guys that later, he's almost like the axlrose of goth rock. He was this kid that came from a really strange town, Pomona, and turned into this icon after he was dead, basically, like became this spokesman for this whole sort of genre.
Oh wow, okay.
Books written about him, and there's stuff coming out all the time, and people, girls that are in high school that have his picture like spray painted on their leather jacket that weren't even born when, that kind of thing. Just like you see now with other people. So
sure,
it was really weird coming out of that and then going straight into pretty much LA metal, which is,
yeah. So how did that happen? How do you go from goth rock to the glam and the tees? And
well, it's weird.
Guns N' Roses at the time, but I guess tell us how you made that transition from goth to glam. I guess if you could phrase it. The title of your book, by the way, is going to be From Goth to Glam. Is that going to be the title of your upcoming book?
Probably not, but something similar to that.
Okay.
Because the funny thing about it, it's kind of like the words hair metal now, associate with like Nothing But a Good Time. That's pretty much hair metal encapsulated, right? But like we didn't say that back then. No one really said that,
right?
Back then, it's like you're a bunch of glam fags, or you're poofs, or you're glam guys, or you're this and that.
What was the phrase then that was used? If because you're saying that even just between Sex Pistol fans and Black Sabbath fans.
Yeah.
So what was the phrase of, what we call now hair metal? Was there
hair metal? Well, like I said, it was probably started out definitely glam rock. Like glam rock to me associates with the 70s, the good stuff, like Alice and the Sweet and Bowie and Gary Glitter and the 70s boom, which but once it became anything sort of post Motley Crue, really, as far as LA club scene rock, was basically like glam metal, glam. That's just kind of what they called it. So even within like the GN'R guys, they weren't really even happy with that back then. I mean, they were kind of 50-50 on being that type of band, because there's, especially Izzy in those days, was calling, pretty much controlling the way that the band grew. And it was like all about New York Dolls and Aerosmith and Hannah Rocks and stuff like that. And then at that point, there was just kind of a small batch of people that really even knew about that stuff. If you were of that age, if you were from 18 to like 25 and you knew about that stuff, either from the old days, or you knew about Hanoi Rocks, which is this weird cult band from Finland. I mean, this is before the internet, so it's not like we just had stuff bombarded all the time. It was like,
yeah,
you had to see a picture of them in a magazine that was like 6 months to a year old that came from Europe, and then you had to go, whoa, where do I get that record? And then you had to explore,
Huh.
and
You're
it
right.
was kind of like a code word. Like in those days, it's like if you're down with Hanoi, and you were down with Aerosmith, and you're down with AC/DC, and a couple other things, it was like that was the GN'R sort of like password.
Okay, I like that.
So anyways, but as far as the transition for me, it was kind of like, it wasn't that hard, because even though I was playing in those type of bands and those kind of clubs, even the band I was playing in towards the end was basically within that scene, was trying to go, we were trying to bum out the punk rockers. It was no, a lot of bands that were around in the first wave were like, screw that, let's go really weird, let's go super arty, or let's go super synthesizer, or let's go super, even Black Flag and bands like that were going like more Black Sabbath, and we were too, and we were all mirrored makeup, and it was a little bit weird, because like that's kind of why initially like we got sort of attracted to like Crew and stuff like that when we first saw them like around town. Is like there was these guys, and they were like older guys, and they were like in a Cheap Trick and stuff like that, but they looked like, Nikki Sixx could have been Susie and the Banshees, with his hair and makeup and lipstick and boots and everything. And it was like almost like we're confused, but extremely fascinated. And then for a couple of years, I think probably say from like 82 to like 85 or 6, slowly became like a lot of people were jumping over the fence, into that scene. And getting into like, this stuff's okay. It's not your basic like jock metal. It's a little, girls dig it. And it's just like the Van Halen kind of formula. It's like the girls dig it. Tons of girls show up at the show because they dig it. Then henceforth, tons of guys show up at the show because there's a ton of girls there.
Right.
And it was just, at this point, it was just guys dressing like girls and girls looking, the same, wearing not much clothes. And, I mean, at the height of it all, it really was like the stereotype that people think it was. It wasn't like that all the time, and it wasn't like that everywhere, but there was times when it really was like chick strippers everywhere, chicks wearing hardly anything and hair up to here, and guys with more makeup than the chicks. And
so since you never cut your hair, did you tease it? Did you use
oh hell
Aquanet?
yeah, oh
okay,
hell yeah,
right on.
Yeah.
You gotta send me. I think you sent me some of those pictures. People are loving them. I appreciate that, for me to share the pictures you sent me of you and A.X.L and Baby Slash to put on social media. Like, wow, just this. I mean, you can barely see your face because you are like animal. Even you switch to bass, you're still like an animal behind.
Yeah,
there.
that's the way I was back then. And even A.X.L was. We had a thing. Like once I actually, joined them as a bass player, which I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but
we'll go back.
Became like this, like he was like that crazy 6-year-old kid that, just wanted to go out there and, because at that point the band wasn't really doing much. Like they weren't playing on a regular basis at all. Right. I mean, it was like every several months or a couple times a year there was a gig. It wasn't really like there was never even a really consistent rehearsal pattern. So there wasn't like this, okay, this is how I get my energy out. I'm going to, you know, rehearse for a week and then do a gig on the weekend and then rehearse for another week. And, you know, it was like these long stretches of like, you know, abstinence from.
Sounds like Guns N' Roses now, which is awesome. Damn it.
It wasn't like the Chinese democracy, like 15-year absence, but it was like, you know, when you're waiting for something to happen, it seems forever. It's like, when are we going to play, man?
Yeah. So I guess, but before I got to that point, you know, when you're obviously looking for bands, how did you get recruited? Because it sounds like through the bands that you're naming, the music.
Yeah.
You know, I think you even mentioned some of your athletic ability. You could see why you and Slash would get along. And now with the energy. But
it's funny because I didn't actually meet him until quite a bit later.
Okay, so who did you meet?
Slash,
first?
you know, we met Slash like you read all the stories. A.X.L was playing with Rapid Fire at the Gazaris, and you know, Izzy had seen this guy that drew the Aerosmith picture, blah blah blah. And, you know, it was so I didn't actually meet him until really we started playing. But I had met Izzy and A.X.L a good couple years, like probably. So if I was probably like at the end of 1983 or something like that, and I had just gotten out of that band I was playing with in that scene basically, and was starting to go see Wasp with Troubadour all the time, starting to see Crew at the Roxy, and those kind of bands that I thought I was checking them out because I go, there's something going on, you know, something else going on it's a good transition between just straight up like hardcore punk and you know, kind of jock metal at the time. It was just which I had no problem with, but just I didn't really want to be in that scene, you know, the spandex and the spikes and everything.
Sure.
I had no problem with hair, no problem with leather, no problem with makeup, no problem with any of that stuff. But it was different the way that we sort of, you know, went through it. And so anyways, I had started just looking like everybody else, like before the internet and before Craigslist, we had this thing called Recycler.
Yeah.
Magazine, newspaper that came out every week. And it was just a classified ads. It was just everything. You could buy cars, you could buy pets, you could buy, you know, rent apartment rentals when they had artists wanted, musicians wanted, actor gigs, you know, and so it was just this free paper. And seems like everybody you knew went to get the Recycler on Thursday and just looking for something. And same way Mick Mars had met,
right,
you know, Motley Crue. I had the Recycler that had a funny tag to it, like, and I'd been seeing this ad, and I had been placing my own ads, trying to find, you know, something that was more in that, you know, dark metal sort of glam thing that was Alice Cooper and, you know, meets Judas Priest meets, you know, The Sweet or something like that. But then at the same time, I was like, yeah, just the people were, I wasn't getting any of the right, people weren't getting it, you know. And
sure.
I was trying out for these bands that were just straightforward, like every other band in LA. They were just straightforward, you know, kind of Van Halen, Journey, Loverboy, kind of whatever, or still some leftover kind of other punk guys that were getting into trying to play rock. Even like Red Cross and bands like that at the time were like sort of branching out into like being a little more hard rock or whatever. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. I want to go roots rock and new wave, you know, that kind of thing. And so anyways, I was down with Hanoi Rocks. I discovered them and I was like, wow, these are pretty fascinating. These guys are like, I'm down with this band called Smack that was also from Finland, who were a little bit more in the, like what I kind of thought Hanoi Rocks should have been like. They were sort of more like, you know, the Dead Boys meets, you know, a hair metal band, because they were from Finland as well, and they only had really weird records that were really hard to find, and you couldn't mention their name to the average kid on the street and stuff. And I turned Slash and A.X.L onto them early on, and they were like, whoa. But anyway, so I found an ad in the Recycler, and it was like really like boom, boom. It was like super, super glam. Like it was the headline. It's like, I guess they needed a drummer. They needed a drummer and a bass player. I think they had a bass player, but they're always kind of still looking for the right bass player.
Okay.
So they had Rich and they had Andre and a couple other people that were sort of leftover people from Izzy's bands in the before days, like Shire and stuff like that.
For sure. Yeah.
And
I'm looking at a timeline, and I want to make sure I give credit to an Anthony Mazzario sent me a timeline, and if I could show you, it's so funny. He does like hand drawn arrows. So I see like Andre Trox was there, Rick Mars was in there, you know, Johnny Christ was in there, but yeah. So sorry, continue. I wanted to make sure.
I think Johnny and Rick were in Shire, this band Shire with Izzy. The Shire was around before, I think. It's just sort of like striped spandex, you know, poofy hair, kind of.
Before I lose it, I want to ask about Shire. I don't mean to interrupt because it's actually kind of important because I had Alan St. Elisa on. So I don't know if you know, and I want to put this out in the universe, especially since you're in that area. I saw a video it was brought to my attention recently that he's homeless. And it was it was outside of McDonald's a couple of years ago. And I mean, I can only hope he's okay. I don't know if you know anything.
The last few times I've seen him, I knew him actually pretty well after Shire because we both worked on Melrose when Melrose was like the shit, the place to be. It's kind of turned into the hood now, and it's where people just get their watches stolen, drive-bys. But it was like, I worked at a record store and he worked on the corner at a gelato place, which was like unheard of back in the 80s. Like, what's gelato? Just ice cream? What the hell's going on here? And, you know, it was like a real trendy, like, you know, it was all gray and Euro looking. And he was Italian and he was super good looking, blonde, but he was Italian.
Yeah.
Could pronounce all the funny Italian words. And so I was literally like work next door to him. So we'd see each other almost every day or a couple times a week. And he was sort of it was in the like post Guns N' Roses kind of taking off days. And we were all sort of like the left behind sort of people at that point. And all these other bands were starting kind of like in the wake of GN'R getting popular. And anyway, he was, had a good situation. He had an older girlfriend and had a nice place, and he was really polite and really seemed really fine, you know, really quiet, soft-spoken. Then I saw him, I didn't see him for a long time. And then I did see him like 10 years later. He came running up to me on the street, "Hey, Steve." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" It was like totally not like at all the same shape and size as Alan. You know, he almost looked like Lux Interior from the Cramps or something like that. He was big, tall, gangly guy with short black hair and all these crazy clothes, and he was really boisterous. And I was like, "You're not Alan." It's like, yeah. And he started like, "Oh, what the hell happened?" And then we caught up, and then I go, "Okay, well, Alan's gone through some changes. He's totally into a different thing now." And then I'd bump into him occasionally around town at different places, and he was equally as, you know, different. And I didn't see him. And so anyways, long story short, I wouldn't doubt that story is true at this point. The odd thing, the one ray of hope is that I did Rock and Roll Ralph's, which is probably on the little map of the jungle, is, you know, about 2 blocks down from Guitar Center. And it's a grocery store, but it's called Rock and Roll Ralph's because it was open 24/7. It was right in the middle of Hollywood. Anytime after like 11 or midnight during the 80s, you'd see more people in bands at Ralph's buying booze and pizzas and stuff than you would at clubs, because everyone lived in an apartment around there, and Seventh Veil was across the street, and the Rock and Roll Denny's was another block down the street. So anyways, I would go there, you know, a bunch of times a week to Ralph's just to get shop. And not that long ago, a couple years ago, the bag boy, the guy bagging your groceries, was like, "Would you like paper or plastic?" And And he just looked at me, he was really quiet and, pretty conservative, normal looking guy. And he goes, Steve Darrow? I was like, yeah. And I looked at him and he goes, it's Alan. And I looked down and he had a little name tag, on his uniform. And I was like, oh, it is Alan. It's like, oh, what are you doing? He's like, I'm working here at Ralph's. Oh, great. And then I kind of thought, okay, well, I'll probably see him all the time now because I go to Ralph's numerous times a week. And I kind of maybe saw him twice, like working there. And I didn't see him after that. So.
Well, I sorry. Once you mentioned Shire, I couldn't, get past that thought because I put it out on. I mean, it's a shot in the dark. I mean, the video I was sent was a couple years old, and you just hope the guy's okay. I was fortunate enough that he actually came. He was in New York, and he came in studio when I interviewed him. So I hope he's okay. Sorry to deviate to that.
That's okay, because I know that the band that later on the bands that he was in were totally different than what Shire or GN'R or anything. They he was actually in this band that was a spin-off of Motorcycle Boy, or he might have been in Motorcycle Boy. They were a real big Hollywood trash rock band at the time. Like everyone worked on Melrose. No one had a motorcycle except the singer, but they were called Motorcycle Boy. They're real like school of Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers meets the Cramps meets the Ramones. Real simple 3-chord trash rock. But Alan ended up in a band like that, and then the couple bands that he had after that, a couple times when I'd bump into him, they'd throw me a cassette. Here's my band. We're called. I don't remember what they're called, and they're just crazy. Like, I mean, he was a shredder. He was like, into like he could play like the Scorpions guys and Rat and stuff like that. I mean, he was, had Marshalls and whammy bars and perfect blonde hair and everything.
See, that's why it's so important, and why I love doing this podcast is to talk to people like Alan and you that have this history that we may not read about all the time.
No.
So and these bands that are near misses, they have the same talent, they have the same drive, but it's just
it's the wrong place at the right time, or vice versa, or something.
Exactly. So I guess let's go back to the right place, right time for you, if we can. So it was you kept looking for an ad in the recycler. Is that what you
recycler? And so I had called, got a message, just a generic answering machine back then. This is whatever, early 80s, and got a call back. I think I was living with my mother in Pasadena at the time. Didn't get the call. Played phone tag with whoever was calling me, and finally I called, and I got the call back from this guy named Jeff, and he's like, "Hey man, yeah. So what do you do? You play drums? What you got? And right off the bat, it was just like, okay, well, what do you look like? Do you have a pair of black pants? Like, yeah, actually, I'm wearing some right now. And well, how long's your hair? What are you into? What's your what's your bag musically? Blah blah blah. What do you play like? And he was looking for all the because at the time,
the
again,
password. I like how you said that, the GN'R
password. The passwords and the buzzwords were like, at the time, if you're either into kind of like Motley Crue and Wasp and Rat, and not even Poison yet, because Poison was just starting, but like some of those bands that were playing around the Strip that had grown out of playing the Strip and gone on to make records, but then there was the Strip bands that were of that ilk, real Pretty Boy, Pink, a lot of Pink and a lot of Stripes, and kind of like London and bands like that, who later entered into the story too. But anyway, everyone was, the people that were into that it was just straight up, Maiden and later Priest and Accept and that kind of stuff, which is I liked musically, but like I said, I wasn't really going for that like all the way. Like they were just those kind of bands, and so he was like looking for people that were a little more dialed into like kind of a niche, like got to be into Aerosmith, you got to be into the Doors, you got to be into the Stones, you got to be into a handful of other things. If you like Priest, it's okay. If you like Maiden, that's okay. You know, you like, you know, whatever. But you know, we're, and then if you heard Hannah Rocks, I was like, yeah, I got their you know, single, a couple posters. It was like, whoa, okay, you know. And then it was like they were looking for a drummer, and so I
What
told
did
them
you say that you played? I guess like because you played both at the time, or you still a
I was
drummer?
playing drums almost exclusively at that point. Like
Okay.
that's what I'd been playing. And then it wasn't until I knew how to play other stuff just at home, and I'd recorded with people and jammed with people playing guitar. But I was, you know, a drummer. I had a drum set, and I was like, thought I was the shit of a drummer. I thought I was badass, and I probably was for my age back then. And you know, at this point, I was just barely like 18 or 19 probably. And anyway, so he said, well, yeah, I got this, you know, got this singer, and you know, I live in West Hollywood, singer lives in Beverly Hills, and you know, we're into this, we're into that, and you know, we got some gigs coming up if we could just find the right people. We got some, you know, record, and it was all this real, it was real, like sounded real, you know, top drawer sort of, like he had his shit together. Like these were real Hollywood people that were real showbiz guys. And I was like trying to figure out like, who could that be? You know, I was like,
because you knew everybody. You were trying to figure out.
Yeah, I kind of knew at least, you know, I knew about most of the movers and shakers, and you know, so anyway, it was a phone tag after that. Well, turns out, you know, they didn't really live anywhere. Like they were just couch, you know, there was
couch surfing.
He had an answering service where he'd check in whatever a couple times a day to get his messages, and then he'd go to a phone booth or whoever's house he was hanging out at, make phone calls, call back, and then, you know, if he happened to call back and he wasn't at someone's house or a phone booth, it was like you'd miss him, and it would be a week before. So it was just
the days before texting.
Yeah. I mean, this was before all that shit.
I know. Yeah.
And anyway, so we had figured out a time. He goes, well, I got this, you know, we got this guys we're working with, the guitar player, and then I play guitar, and our singers, you know, he didn't say anything about like their sound. I mean, they're like, he didn't say we got this awesome singer that he sounds like, you know, he's going to be the biggest thing in the world. He was just like, yeah, we got singer Bill, you know, and
singer Bill
living in Beverly Hills. And I was like, okay, well, these are obviously, like I said, like, I was picturing them to be like someone in Rainbow or someone like, you know, a big band like that. And then he goes, well, when we get a rehearsal set up, you know, for an audition, we'll let you know, like, because they didn't really have a place to live, and they weren't even like, they couldn't even play in the garage at their house because they didn't have a house, you know. So they'd have to rent a hourly place, and then they'd have to get money to rent the hourly place. So that took a whole other, you know, stretch of time for that to come through. So anyways, it was a good couple of weeks, and I was like, okay, I want to check these guys out. These guys sound promising. You know, I got a list of 5 calls, and, you know, this one sounds like definitely one I want to check out just because it's so weird. And, but it sounds like it's, you know, it has potential. And anyway, so it took a really long time for that to actually happen. And then one day I was actually, I didn't even have a car at that point. I was borrowing my mom's car, I think, and I drove to Hollywood from Pasadena. It's a half hour away, but if you weren't in Hollywood, everything was like, you know, it's kind of like if you live in New York City, anything that's past the bridge or tunnel is Mexico. Or Canada, you know what I mean? It's like,
understood, sure.
Mentally. So I was in Hollywood, and I pulled over to a phone booth, and I had Jeff's number scrawled down on some eyeliner somewhere, and pulled, and I was like, okay, I'm in Hollywood. I think I should call these guys. Maybe we could get together and meet, you know, and because I'm only here for whatever till a couple hours, I got to take the car back, and so I called, and it was like, oh yeah, oh hey, which one were you? Like he was a little bit confused, like he'd probably gotten a lot of calls or a few calls, and I go, yeah, I'm just down the street, man. I could come over. I'll probably be there in 10 minutes. He's like, oh, what do you look like again? How long is your hair? Wait. and he was like trying to like filter the idiots out, you know, and the posers and the not cool rockers out. And he goes, okay, well, yeah, we're here. I guess, can you come over in like a half hour? And he told me where they lived. And he goes, okay, you go on Sunset and then you'll see the Coconut Teaser and the liquor locker there, which is a liquor store, you know, literally on the corner about 100 yards from their little place they live. You drive up there, and then for about, you know, half a block north of Sunset, you'll see this sign that's, you know, a one-way street and a sign that says "Do not enter." Enter. When you see that sign, enter. And we live right there. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of fancy pants. Like, you know, these guys have a nice pad, because that's like getting into Hollywood Hills,
Okay.
real estate, big houses, and you know, I don't know if you heard of the Coconut Teaser.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It was before, it was always there. It was like this bar / barbecue restaurant that was always right on a big corner of Sunset and Laurel Canyon Boulevard, and really prime real estate. It's like a super fancy dance club now, but it wasn't really back then. It was just basically a bar. It wasn't really known as a rock club yet, but that's just where they lived. And so I pull up on this road, and there's this little, it looked like a kind of a tool shed. Like, it was like the sort of garage where, like, from the big house, that was whoever they were renting this room from lived in a big kind of house up the road a bit, and then this little one door, and there was like this place, like literally like a place where you would have kept your bicycles or something if you had a nice big house, or, you know, pool house almost, but really small, and maybe had a bathroom, I guess, and enough for like 2 cots, and you know, and that was it. And so I pulled up in my car, and this is this door like right on the street, like no lawn, no yard, no nothing, just this door open, and I see Jeff, Izzy, and I go, oh, that's that guy. I'd seen him a bunch around town over the last few years.
Okay.
Just driving around, I'd see him at clubs, I'd see him walking down the street, and you know, he'd seen me as well, and there'd kind of be like this weird little head turn, like no one ever said anything because it wasn't cool, but like, that guy looks weird. He looks wrong. He looks really cool, but he's always in this kind of wrong place. And he has this pink leather jacket and his, you know, Nikki Sixx hair, and but he'd be like in some kind of nice part of town with you know, like places where those people wouldn't hang out. I even saw him at a Judas Priest concert at Long Beach Arena once, like in this huge crowd of thousands of people, like point of entry tour or something like that. You know, all these people spilling out, and the one person that I just caught my eye was Izzy, you know, out of these millions of people. And so anyway, I was like, that's that guy. Okay, now it's all making sense. I wonder who this singer is. And so he's like, oh, hey, yeah, come on in. And their room wasn't much bigger than the car I was in. And it was just him, and there was somebody else there that I don't remember who it was. It wasn't someone in the band, it was just a friend, maybe a chick. And it's like, hey, you know, quiet, soft-spoken Izzy. And well, yeah, hey, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. You got any tapes, you know? And I'll play some stuff that we've done, we've been working on. Just, they had these little tapes and Ghetto Blaster, you know, like boombox, cassette, you know, a portable cassette player, and just with built-in mic, you'd sit there and put the guitar amp 2 feet away, and the singer would get close and, you know, try to record little ideas. And so they just kind of had that. And he played me some ideas, and it was literally just him and A.X.L, like Cold Hard Cash, and, you know, Shadow of Your Love and stuff like that. And then they had done that demo with Chris Webber before that, which had, you know, Johnny Christ and those guys on it at Mystic Studios. So it was like, he goes, yeah, this is the stuff we've been doing. This was like, you know, a little while ago. We're kind of not, it's an idea that you could tell what we're up to, but we're sort of going in a different direction than that, you know? And there's still no A.X.L. And then out of the bathroom, which was like just, you know, 10 feet away, the other side of the house, the door opens and this guy comes out, you know, with like a rock, you know, 3/4 length rock jersey on that was like shredded. tied back together and real quiet. And like, hey, how's it going? You know, and he wasn't like, you know, he was just very quiet and reserved. And Izzy was doing all the talking and all the action and stuff. And, it's like, hey.
Okay.
And listening to this stuff and going, yeah, okay, this is pretty cool. I like this. This is way like, it was not what I was expecting. It was cooler, you know.
It sounds like nothing was what you were expecting.
No, and like the way that their tapes, their demos on the boombox were just so raw. I mean, it was more punk rock than any of the shit that I'd been hearing, but with A.X.L singing. So it was like, you know.
What did you think of his voice at that time?
I listened and I was like, damn, because it was all he had, like all he used anyways was like one section of his range at that point. It was just all the time. It was just on 11 all the time. There was no Mr. Brownstone voice or ballad voice, or it was just, you know, scream. And I was like, so after about the third song, I looked over to him. He still wasn't really saying much, you know. And I go, do you like Nazareth by any chance? And he looked at me and kind of like, goes, yeah. I like that a lot. And I was like, right on. That's awesome. Because no one really sings like that, you know, like anymore. Like at that point, there weren't, you know, it was just the real, like, kind of David Lee Roth voice, or like, you know, you know, operatic metal voice, and nothing much in between. And so I was like, yeah, well, shit, this is crazy. This is cool. And he's like, well, yeah, we hung out and we just shot the shit, and it was kind of comfortable. Like we got along, I think. And we hung out, and then I had to go, and because yeah, we'll be in touch. You know, we got this going on. We just got to find the right people. We just, you know, not really happy with the situation we got now. And I don't even know how long they stayed in that room that they were renting, but probably by the next time that I talked to them, they were already moved out. Maybe a little after that. But so anyways, I started getting these more frequent calls from Izzy, like sometimes before I'd wake up, sometimes in the middle of the night.
Okay.
And my mom got a little bit perturbed. Like, answer the phone, because I lived in the garage behind the house, and she'd have to come out and get me, and blah blah blah. Telephone, you know, 10 minutes later I'd come in. Hello. It's like, hey, yeah, so can you get out here? We got this, you know, if we can rehearse and get these songs down, I could get this gig opening for a friend of mine's band. And then that didn't happen. And then there was this crazy, he had a friend, he always had a scheme. He always had a plan. He always had things going on, stuff going on.
Okay.
Even back then. And there was somebody in Finland that had some sort of Hanoi Rocks connection. Like, I didn't even know what the connection was, if he just maybe knew them or was from Finland, so it was enough of a connection.
Okay.
But he was like a guy that was trying to get, you know, like a promoter type guy. Like, there's always those guys that are like, yeah, man, get your shit together and come on over here, and I can make sure you have like the best gigs, and you know. And so Izzy had, I guess, been carrying on these late night conversations with this guy, you know, on the phone, like talking to this guy. I forget his name. He had a funny name, and was like, we got to do this, man. We got to get shit together and get a band together and just fucking go over there. They'll pay for it, and you know, be on
to go to Finland.
Yeah. And I was like, well, okay, sure. And so anyways, they had finally gotten to the point where they rented a room to audition rehearsal type thing, right? Our hourly rehearsal place down. It was kind of far out of town in a way, because it was cheaper. And so I went, and I think they had some girl, maybe a girlfriend, that drove one car, and I went with my mom's car with my drum loaded.
I love that, by the way.
Like, it was a Toyota like sedan too. It wasn't like an SUV or a station wagon. So I had mostly drums in the back seat and a few in the front seat and a couple of stands here and there. And I went to their place and picked up, I think A.X.L rode with me, and with a drum on his lap after he got in, you know, in the front seat. And Izzy had his little 1 amp that he had, and a guitar, and the girl, and then we took off down to the studio. And remember, we stopped at a 7-Eleven on the way because it was like probably a 15-minute drive. And Axl got a cup of coffee to go, and I got one too. And we're driving, and it was like, okay, let's go to the studio now. We stopped and we've got our shit, you know, beer and coffee. You know, I put the gas on at a stop sign, and he like spilled some coffee on his lap, and he just went like, I was like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. Oh. Spilled coffee on my lap. You know, that feeling. And I was like, okay, well, you'll get over it. So he was already kind of like on edge, you know. So we got to the studio, we set up, and big mirror on, you know, it was almost like a dance ballet rehearsal studio, like in a way. They had a big full-length mirror, so they were doing their thing in the mirror, and I was like setting up my drums, and Izzy just had, it was just us three really. And the girl was there just kind of waiting for it to be over so we could drive him home. And so we jammed, and A.X.L sang, and there was a piano in there, and A.X.L played like a little bit of piano. Wow, this guy's got some weird, you know, talent. And it turns out in the long run, after the thing, you know, I called him a couple days later. So when are we gonna jam again? It was like you know, the short end of the story is they didn't like the way I played drums. Even though I'd been playing longer than they had been playing, they just was not right. The style wasn't right. I was more, you know, a crazy sort of 70s style drumming, and they were just looking for somebody really straightforward. And at the time, most of the drummers in town were aspiring to be like Tommy Lee and stuff like that, you know, very flashy and very animated and lots of fills and lots of stuff. And they were just, in Izzy's mind anyway, they were really looking for something different than that.
Okay.
Really straightforward, really just almost Ramones simplicity, but more hard rock version, like AC/DC, which wasn't what I was doing at all. So anyways, they're like, yeah, we got another couple drummers we want to try out before making decisions, and blah, 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 just kind of blowing me off, basically. He goes, let's come out and hang out and stuff, and we'll, you know, we'll go see blah, blah, blah show, we'll hang out, we'll go to the bar or whatever, but we got some other guys we want to try out first, and then if worst comes to worst, we can use our old guy to play drums for the shows we got coming up, you know. And so I was like, oh, that was kind of a disappointment. So I kind of was still searching for bands and stayed in touch with them, called them every once in a while, and got, you know, got the answer machines, and then I'd find out where Bill was and try to call him and leave messages with his girlfriend that he was living with and stuff like that. And then I had found this other band that was actually super, like, looking back on it, was like quintessential hair metal band. They were like a big club. They were called Carry Doll. They were basically big in LA. Okay. The club scene, and they were able to headline the Troubadour and headline these clubs like that. And they had a lot of people, and they had a big show. They had flash bombs and pyro, and the singer came out in a big pink coffin, you know. And they had blood. You know, it was like real Wasp, Kiss, Motley Crue. They presented it as being like a cross between Alice Cooper and New York Dolls meets, you know, Too Fast for Love, but it was just basically a Kiss show. And they were looking for a drummer and a bass player as well. And I called them up and I said, I heard of you guys. I haven't seen you, but I've heard of you guys. I've seen your ads all the time, and I know you have a record out. And he goes, well, we just found a really good drummer, but you play bass? And I go, well, I can give it a try. He's like, well, come on down. Like, I don't even care, you know. You know, we said that sort of, you know, some of our influences were the same and stuff too. And so that it was really odd. They were in from really the suburbs, like down in towards Long Beach, and they rehearsed in the parking lot of this. It was so not Hollywood, so not hair metal. It was the funniest weird juxtaposition. It was like they were literally rehearsed in like an Airstream trailer, you know, like you'd go on vacation with. Still bigger than A.X.L and Izzy's rented room, but it was not much bigger. And it was in the parking lot, the back parking lot behind this warehouse where it was out in a field. I mean, it was just really weird. yet they were this big, glamorous, colorful, you know, Hollywood hair metal band. And that's just where they rehearsed.
Yeah.
That's how he went about doing his band and stuff. So I ended up playing bass for them because I knew how to play enough and I could wear enough, you know, interesting clothes and jump around enough to where it fit, you know. And
I mean,
so
if
then
Sid Vicious could play bass, and you could play bass.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, Nikki Sixx was barely playing bass in the days when I saw them, and was just enamored with like how great they were. But he was just running around, setting shit on fire, and hitting a note every once in a while, and letting everyone else do the work. And so I was kind of like, well, I could do that. And especially coming from punk rock, where it was about playing simple, anyways. And so by that time, he had like a lot of gigs booked, and we were playing around quite a bit and playing. It was funny because at the time it was just like, well, this is okay. So that was like officially my entry into like that Hollywood metal scene.
Okay.
As far as playing in a band, like I'd been going to shows and stuff, but like as far as being in one of those bands and being on the bill with, you know, I mean, we played with like Leatherwolf opened for us, and like we played a show once with Slayer open for us and Lizzie Borden.
Oh,
we
wow.
were the headliners. And you know, London and Ruby Slippers and all these kind of real glammy Hollywood bands. And
Slayer was like that.
no, they weren't at all. But we had Carrie Doll had gotten sort of lumped in with Lizzie. I don't know if you're familiar with Lizzie Borden, but they were around, and they were, you know, long around before even Carrie Doll was, I think, as far as being a band. They had records out and stuff, but they were like, they sounded like Maiden, early Maiden with double guitars, but they dressed really leathery, and the singer had this crazy, like he'd do a lot of horror movie stuff with blood and mannequins and you know, Alice Cooper shtick and Wasp shtick.
The theatrics.
More in a like 80s metal way. And then Slayer was that way because their image, they had just gotten into like wearing the really long spikes, and they just discovered Venom and pretty much retooled their sound to be just like Venom. And
okay.
And so they did things. Then if you look at the old ads from the LA trade papers, you know, that would have upcoming ads for club shows and stuff, there was always, Slayer would always have like blood dripping from their mouth, and the girl, like a half naked girl in leather with her throat slit, you know, like that kind of stuff. So
wholesome family fun.
Yeah. I mean, it was like way more cheesy than you'd expect Slayer ever to be, but at the same time, it was, you know, extreme back then.
Sure.
And Carrie Doll sort of fell into that just purely visually and theatrically. Musically, it was like, you know, it was like having Whitesnake open for Slayer. It just made no sense.
Right. That's how I was.
But so, anyways, we played pretty good clubs, and Carrie, the singer, and the guitar player, who was a girl, Carrie had pretty much got a whole new band when I joined, and they had a girl guitar player, which was very cutting edge at that time for a metal band.
Yeah.
It was okay in punk bands and weirdo bands and stuff, but it was like, and she could shred. She was really good. She was in a punk band before, but she was really into like shredding. And Carrie, it was real effeminate anyways, you know, so having a girl was even more perfect. You know, it was like, you can't get any more glam than actually having a real girl in the band.
There you go.
And
she can help you with the makeup.
Big at the time, and you know, Vixen had sort of maybe just started to be on people's radar and stuff like that. And so anyways, Carrie and the guitar player, they knew about Izzy a little. They knew about, and they made friends with him just on a scene, you know, and they knew A.X.L maybe, and they were aware that they existed, and they're like, oh, those guys are cool. They look really cool, and they come to our shows sometimes. We see them out and invite them to one of the shows, you know. And so I invite them to the show, and sometimes they'd come, sometimes they wouldn't, you know, A.X.L and Izzy.
But did they know, like, now that you played bass? Were they looking for a bass player?
Well, that's the funny thing. I think that I told him, but whether or not it registered or not, I don't know, because like I said, they were already couch surfing in 3 or 4 different places since I had initially met with them, and were had a few gigs popped up that they'd done, like real, like, you small, like the orphanage and stuff like that, and so what happened is there was a couple times when Carrie Doll would play like a high up on the bill, either it's headlining or co-headlining show, and Rose or would actually be like the opening act. We did one show with them at Madame Wong's West, which is in Santa Monica, and there's two Madame Wongs. You've probably seen the gigs, the early gigs listed. There was one that was literally today's date, June 28th, 1984. That was at the other Madame Wong's in Chinatown near downtown.
Okay.
But there was a bigger Madame Wong's in Santa Monica, and it had two levels, like a big room upstairs, and then downstairs they had another bar and another restaurant, and a smaller stage. And of course, the more popular bands would play upstairs in the big stage, and then the local kind of bands would play downstairs. But you could go to both. You could see both bands. If you paid to get in, you could choose wherever you wanted to see.
That's cool.
So for some odd reason, and we didn't know about any of this at the time, I didn't, but Carrie had gotten this gig as a headliner at Madame Wong's West, and the opening band was this new band that Kim Fowley was bringing out from Pennsylvania called Poison. And they were just visiting LA for like a week, and they had like a couple gigs, and Kim Fowley was courting them around town, trying to get hype Poison into letting him produce them and write songs. Oh, I did Kiss, I did Alice Cooper, I did the Runaways, I did all this stuff, and You Need Me, and we didn't know about Poison. We just Carrie might have heard of them or something like that, but they were just these kind of guys from back east. And then this other band, forget what they're called, they were another kind of local, real straightforward, almost Journey type of hard rock band. And then downstairs was Rose playing in the small cheap room. It was Rose and this band called Pyrus, which was Tracy Guns' first band. Right. And another band, which I forget, but there was, if I look at the list, I'll remember. They had some sort of connection in the whole soap opera. So that was the first time I met Tracy Guns. He came in the dressing room, and we were putting on a like hair metal outfit. And he comes in his white lace suit, and he's like, "Does anybody have a match? I gotta light up my my eyebrow pencil. I need and he was just like, "Whoa, who is this guy?" And I was like, I ran down and saw, Izzy and Bill's band, because it was like, these guys are kind of, and I ended up hanging around with them in their dressing room more than the band that I was in, And, my now wife, who was not even my girlfriend at the time, came to the show.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she came to the show with her, current significant other back then. And because I invited him, I said, "Yeah, come see my band. I know you like the Dolls and I like this kind of stuff, so you might like these guys." And they were sort of in the death rock scene, but they were kind of disenfranchised, and they were always looking for more of a rock and roll outlet and stuff. So I go, she had the hugest hair. She was blonde, but she had like the biggest, like those pictures you've seen of Sebastian Bach when he was in like, Madame X, like her hair looked like that. And I was like, can you help me with my hair? She came in our dressing room, which was the Hollywood Rose dressing room.
Okay.
And their girlfriends were like, "Excuse me, like, who is this?" And I was like, "Yeah, just I got to go on stage upstairs in like a half hour. She's just helping me out." It's like, okay. So anyways, we watched them play and watched Pyrus a little bit. And then I'd kind of go back up downstairs, checking things out, with the bands, and saw Poison and for a second. I saw them backstage, and they were really different looking too at that point. So anyways, just long story short, which is not that short, but in Carrie Doll days, we crossed paths with all those bands like before they were really,
and it's just been bananas that you could see them in the same venue. Like you just go upstairs and downstairs.
It happened a lot, actually. Like you just have to really do your research and look at the old club listings and stuff, and and see, wow, really? And there was a few clubs that had like, the upstairs and downstairs are two rooms, and then a couple of other clubs that would just be like, they'd just put whoever on a bill with whoever. It was really eclectic, And so that was where I kind of, met Tracy for the first time and was really sure where he was coming from, but I knew that he was buddies with those guys. He's like, hey, Bill and stuff. And I was like, yeah. And so again, I kind of just, as a bro, I was more hanging out with those guys more. Even when I wasn't playing, like if I'd go out to a show, I'd go out to a show and see if they wanted to go or give them a ride or whatever. More
You
so
really connected with them, it seems.
Yeah. And then it's sort of like they had ended up, so we were bros, friends, whatever. And we'd see each other maybe once, twice a month, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on where they were. And they'd actually started playing some gigs, some of the with Weber and Johnny Christ and whichever bass player, and I'd go and see them just to support them. Like we'd go to the Troubadour. They lucky enough to get a show like a Troubadour or Cafe de Grand or something, and on a weeknight real early, and there'd be really hardly anybody there, and me and Axl had this thing where like, even not on stage, like I'd have a drink, like cocktail, and I'd take an ice cube, throw it at him, like he'd be like, what? He'd get all into it. He'd like throw something back at me, like, come on. Not like violent, just like, like a fun kind of angst, kind
like
of
a brotherly thing, it sounds like.
He brought in the punky sort of energy to their show, and Izzy was looking cool, striking poses, and Weber was shredding away. And but Axl was always about running around back and forth and doing his thing if he was allowed to, And then so that went on, and then they came to see me when I played with Carrie Doll at the other Madame Wong's in Chinatown. They came, and it was Izzy and Bill, and I'm not sure who else came with them. And we were playing, it was like a pretty full house, and we were playing headlining. I think it was Leatherwolf actually. And so anyways, after the show, after, I'd kind of like cleaned up some of the sweat and gotten our equipment off the stage, and I was just kind of not ready to go home yet, but I was just sort of hanging around on the stairs, and I saw Izzy finally, and he had been downstairs chatting to some chicks, and like he came up the stairs, and I was like, oh, hey, what'd you think? He's like, oh, that's crazy, man. I go, so I heard, a couple weeks ago or something, Bill told me you had a show booked on whatever date, I go, that's cool. He's like, what are you talking about? I go, well, who's playing it? He's like, what are you talking about? You're playing at it. And I'm like, I am? Like, is Carrie Doll like on the same gig? They didn't tell me about that, And he goes, no, you're playing bass. I go, I am? He's like, yeah, we need a bass player. You're perfect. And like, that's back to your question of, 20 minutes ago, like, did they know you were playing bass? It's like, they kind of didn't. But once they were like, came and saw the band, they were like, he can play bass as good as anybody,
Yeah, you weren't the right style for drumming, but you were for bass.
Yeah. And I wasn't the right style even for Carrie Doll necessarily. And, but, they were smart enough to connect the dots and whatever. So I go, oh, okay, well, I could be in both bands. It's no biggie. I'm all for it, because I'd been like gone like almost a year of not playing with anybody. And I'd moved back to my dad's for a while and was just like itching to play.
You were hungry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally,
and,
probably.
So we did that, and I don't even remember the gig really, but that's where things get convoluted.
Okay.
Only because of, the fact that, Izzy was driving the bus back then, and he was booking the gigs, and he was booking the rehearsals, and he was calling shots of who was going to be in the band and not. And then by the time that first gig actually happened, he was out of the picture. So it was just this really short, maybe month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks of like, he was there, and then it was like, where's Izzy? Can we do a pause real quick? I gotta pee.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So
yeah, no worries about the break. I've had to take pee breaks. Don't worry. It happens. And you know what? Because
huge glass of Jack Daniels that I'm downing in the middle of the day.
Oh, nice. I got my thermos, my Ninja Turtles thermos of water.
Are you down with that Turtles thing?
I know. I could have done a Ninja Turtles podcast, but no, it's a GN'R podcast, and I didn't expect to.
There's got to be a tie-in somewhere.
There is. Oh, there is. There's rumors of A.X.L being late because he was watching Ninja Turtles 2. That's
One
just,
of the many times he was late.
I don't know. I want to believe that. I don't know if that's true, but no. Before we get back into it, I know I'm keeping you here for a while. Thank you. I'm just like I'm hanging on every word because it's another side of the story that we haven't.
No, that's fine.
heard.
That's why, if you got more, if you want to steer me in a different direction, just let me know.
No, it's good. I was just making sure because my cat didn't press any buttons. I know you have some cats, and your cats are all fat. You guys are.
He's gonna sleep until midnight.
I
I
got
start
you.
to wake up, and then it'll. But
So
yeah,
what-
people think that like we sleep until 3 in Hollywood and we drink Jack Daniels all day. It's just iced tea, and I haven't drank. I stopped drinking when I was about 21.
Oh wow.
Like kind of the second it became legal for me to drink, I stopped.
Oh wow. Good for you. Good for you.
And
Yeah, I don't drink either, but not.
so that kind of made it difficult in the rock world too. Like, let's go out and have a couple beers and get all fucked up. And you're like, well, no, I'll go with you, but I'll watch you.
I got to imagine, especially with Izzy, with he had so like when that maybe that's part of the Where is Izzy? So that's where we I guess kind of left off.
Yeah.
At that time, it was Rose. Like I guess where's Hollywood?
It was
Rose?
it was again too. It was always a bit of a blurry line, at least in everyone's timeline, is when it was Rose, when it was Hollywood Rose. It kind of went back and forth a few times. But definitely before I was playing with them, they were called Rose, just straight up Rose. And I know A.X.L had mentioned to me he was still Bill, and he goes, yeah, we got a handful of different names kicking around that we want to play with, like Roses. That's cool, but I call myself, that's kind of like the last name I use sometimes, but I wanted to call the band A.X.L. I was like, oh, what does that stand for? Because in the punk world, there was all these UXA and GBH and all these they always had these gnarly political like initials for something, and MOD and SOD. It was like, I go, what does that stand for? And he goes, A.X.L.
Nothing.
Like, oh, that's cool. And then that's probably when I went, well, that's pretty tough. It's not like a super glammy name. It's go for it, because he was like always pushing for like a tougher street metal hard rock image, and Izzy was hanging on to the other part of it. And but that's probably, maybe I've read that you're the guy that convinced A.X.L to call himself A.X.L, and I don't really remember doing that, but I also pretty much figure that that's something that I would have done. So it probably happened right then. At that point, if it did, I'll go, why don't you just call yourself A.X.L, because you live and you live and breathe A.X.L, the band A.X.L that never was called A.X.L. And so once they were playing with the name Hollywood Rose, because they were all wanted to be associated with living in Hollywood. And it was more like New York Dolls, more like Hanoi Rocks, HR, get it? And
got it.
A lot of bands were doing that, like the Something City, something, so it sounded a little bit more everything. It sounded kind of, Rose was kind of like the soft side, and Hollywood was like, the kind of glamorous, glitzy side and seedy side at the same time. So I really can't tell you exactly what happened as far as Izzy not being around, other than everything, to my knowledge, he was around. He organized the rehearsal. He'd they had met Slash, and I had met Slash just on the street in front of Gazzari's one night, and they were all introduced, and Steve was there. But it was there was talk of, well, we got these guys that A.X.L's been talking to, and drummer is really good. He's double bass, long blonde hair, and this guy Saul plays guitar. He can play just like Joe Perry, and we're talks about checking them out, like audition, see how it works. You should come and play bass. Like, okay, just tell me. It had nothing to do with really, like, they were bantering back and forth over a period of a few months or whatever. I didn't know about road crew then, you know, I didn't know about any of that stuff. And so anyways, I guess at some point they had gotten together, just maybe Slash and Izzy, or Slash and Bill had gotten together and traded riffs, traded lyrics and stuff like that, and traded tapes maybe. And Slash learned the songs that they had going, like the simpler, you know, Anything Goes and stuff like that from those days. And then Slash was slowly bringing in his slower, more slashy, more complex riffs, you know, and they were trying to, you know, make it meld somehow. So anyways, we go to the rehearsal. It was everybody. It was me, Izzy, Slash, Steve, A.X.L at Programmer Studios, which is over across the street from Hollywood High. And it was the cheapest place in town. And so we did the rehearsal, and then they go, okay, let's get together in like either next week, you know, or a week after. And by that rehearsal, there was no Izzy, right? So somehow, and you got to understand, everyone's got to understand in the GN'R world back then, that was really not uncommon. Like even once they became a band, as far as I know, like the Appetite lineup, they were like, people were dropping out and coming back and dropping out, you know, a lot, like temporarily. Someone would get in a fight, someone's feeling was get hurt, someone would just go, fuck this shit, I'm out of here. And then a week later, they'd all be like, okay, so let's go, you know. And so in the early days, it was like that too. And don't really know where it stemmed from, you know. And we all know that Izzy had disappearance issues, you know, which I didn't know about, other than the fact that sometimes I wouldn't hear from him for a couple of weeks because he didn't have a phone and, you know, didn't have a place to live. So I just figured it was that, you know. And so anyways, by the next rehearsal, it was just Steve and me and Slash and A.X.L. And he says, yeah, we're just gonna give this a try, the one guitar thing. You know, I got these other guys in mind maybe for playing guitar if we need a second, you know, guy. But the Slash guy's like, he could play circles around, you know, all kinds of people. And I think we could do it with just one guitar. I mean, shit, Motley Crue's just got one guitar player.
Right.
Van Halen just got one guitar player. And Slash really was like, back then, he was like a bit different. Like he was, you know, he had the BC Rich and the tremolo bar, and he was like more in the 80s metal style. Still had his thing coming through, the Aerosmith stuff and all that, but he was able to sort of, you know, shred with the rest of them. And that's another thing. Like I watched a bit of your YouTube thing the other day with Roy Orbison Jr.
Okay, sure, yeah.
And I know he kind of went off on his Marshall amps and guitar sound and thing, which I totally like latched onto. And you're probably going to go, oh, no, I don't know what he's talking about. But
there are people that do. I wish I.
There are people that do. And I was fascinated because that's the kind of, you know, trivia that I'm fascinated by. And I didn't know that about Roy. I knew it about, you know, the Marshalls and the Roy Orbison. I knew about other people and other guitars and other amps and stuff like that. But and then he went and grabbed his Silver Jubilee Marshall and said, "This is the Slash amp," you know.
Right.
Well, it kind of is for a time, and it kind of isn't. But and he's talking about here, you know, walking by someplace and hearing a Queen song coming over the speakers somewhere, and having be like a light bulb moment, you know. It's like that sound, that tone, that weird, you know, nasally, sharp singing lead tone that, you know, you associate with Slash, but Queen had it all these years before, you know, and it's like, yeah. And so did a few other people, like two words that aren't Brian May, Mick Ronson.
Okay.
So tell Orbison, I'm not cutting him down or anything, but Mick Ronson. And there's a Bowie connection with Slash, and
all right,
you know, and he was doing that thing, you know, a couple years before Queen was even formed, and as well as a couple other guys. But it's a combination of their amps and their tone settings and the another 2 words, cocked, which isn't
Okay.
erotic code for anything. It's just has to do with having a wah-wah pedal and keeping it in one spot instead of that classic wow, wow, wow. You keep it about halfway and it gives you this,
Huh.
you know, and which slash, you know, that classic November Rain kind of sound is similar to the classic, you know, Ziggy Stardust kind of sound. And Bronson was probably trying to cop Jeff Beck's weird tone, you know, from the Yardbirds days. And so it goes back, you know, farther than that. But anyway, so Slash at that point was also super into Michael Schenker.
Okay.
Well, I was like, wow, okay. It has, you know, UFO, and Schenker was just starting to go solo then. And it didn't really like to have that kind of a band, like what Schenker was doing wasn't really in the same trajectory as like a Hanoi Rocks type of band or an Aerosmith. It was more, you know, but Slash still had that ability to do that kind of thing. And he was doing a lot of stuff that was more similar to that in the early days. And then slowly it sort of, you know, simplified into the.
Were you able to connect with him as easily, maybe on a personal level, as you seem to have with A.X.L and Izzy, or Bill
Yes
and
no.
Jeff?
Yeah, yes and no, personality wise for sure. And musically, because he knew more about building a song and building riffs and building melodies and choruses and stuff. And I think A.X.L was actually sort of like at the same time too, because I think he had a lot of stuff brewing that he wasn't really able to get out. Because so A.X.L's, you know, he's older than all of us a little bit, and not much, but you know, enough to where being in Indiana and Midwest, I mean, he was seriously growing up with those Elton John and those Meatloaf and those Billy Joel and you know, those really classic Midwestern, not metal but hard rock, you know, overproduced epic records, you know. And even the later Alice Cooper, like when he was working with Bernie Taupin and stuff, like, you know, the late 70s Alice Cooper, like, you know, From the Inside and stuff like that, they had this really weird epic kind of songs with a lot of parts, and they were really super produced and super FM radio, but they weren't just kick-ass 3-chord fast rock songs, you know. And so I think, and Thin Lizzy too, he was a huge Thin Lizzy fan.
Were you hearing any of that, I guess, early on? Obviously with the, you know, you were talking about A.X.L and his one, he only knew how to control that one octave, and everything was hard. But it was released when they had the box set come out, the 9-minute piano version of November Rain, and and Don't Cry was, you know, written well before The Illusion. So did you get to hear any of that early stuff?
I did. Well, I mean, I heard him play piano, and I heard him sort of kind of mimic, like, I wasn't aware that he was that well-rounded. I knew he had it in it, definitely, and he had it in here, you know. I just didn't know that he could have that kind of broad range. And I heard him mimic like old blues singers and stuff, playing piano, you know. And so I knew he had that, like, and his speaking voice is very gruff and low. It's not, you know, he's not screaming.
It's like different,
yeah. And so, and him and Slash both are super, you know, low key, soft spoken when unless they're pissed, I guess, or really want to scream, but they're both really breathy and both really, you know. And to hear A.X.L, you know, speak and be kind of calm, and then like go out there, you're like, well, okay, and then completely turn red, his face, and then go back to being like, hey, what's going on? You know, that kind of
Sounds like A.X.L was just acting like my cat who was just clawing at the couch.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the cat, like the crazy kitten. It was just like, come on. And then he'd be asleep, you know? And then, Izzy, on the other hand, was pretty much the same, I think, more or less the same keel most of the time. Slash, once I got to know his personality, you could tell he was like, he wanted to get shit done too. Like, he was a mover and shaker, but he was also from California, so he's kind of laid back and lazy, you know, too, a little bit. And then Adler was just Adler, he was that, yeah, come on, yeah, everything was groovy, everything was great. He was on a party and play drums. He was living in his car at that point. He wasn't even living like in a small room. He was living in a Pacer.
Hey, you
know
know
what
what?
GMC Pacer is?
I've heard of it.
Google it. If you're anywhere over like 50 years old, GMC made these really bizarre, stupid cars in like the mid 70s that were just ugly as hell. And Pacer was just like kind of like a cross between a Pinto and a Volkswagen. It was just fat but short, weird car. And
I know Pinto's the standard for terrible cars.
yeah. And like if you were, it was small enough to be like a compact car, but big enough to load your whole drum set into.
Would you rather have that, or would you rather have your mom's car? I guess that's the
I would have,
question.
I would have made more sense as a working drummer to have the Pacer.
Okay.
But
Okay,
in
fair
the
enough.
early 80s, a Pacer probably was like, $180 out of the recycler.
Oh wow. Okay.
The Toyota was maybe $1,000, so
So I guess how often did you play? Because it's one person removed from what would be
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses.
yeah.
Like, so how many times did you get to play with Axl slash? Like,
Not that many. Looking back on it, it seemed like a bunch, but again, it was all spread out, and it would be like kind of like 2 or 3 gigs in a month, and then like nothing for a long time, and then another batch, and then nothing, and then so it's probably half a dozen shows altogether, but
they can never get
just,
going like
it
that.
sure seems like more to me because of all the soap opera of being involved in it and the phone calls.
The map getting there, and then the path afterwards. So I guess, how did you exit?
That's a mystery too.
Okay.
The best way to describe it is I didn't quit and I wasn't fired. It was just sort of like this odd thing where they kind of just got somebody else without telling me for a gig that I booked. I booked this gig, and so this is going back to the Poison thing again.
Okay.
Poison, in the interim of when I was in Carry Doll and say in '83 or whatever, and playing, and those bands all opening, Slayer, blah blah blah. Okay, so probably fast forward a year and a half, I'd been playing with Hollywoodrose, and since then Poison had moved to LA and said, fuck it, we're gonna be an LA band. They weren't working with the Kim Valley, they were just being Poison, being a band on the street, and they got CC DeVille, and eventually they had a different guy before, and
Slash tried out.
Because they kind of, it was weird because once they came to LA, they sort of just dove head, like they had that East Coast, like, come on, let's get shit going.
Yeah, it's the New York thing.
Just were literally out there flyering every night, meeting. They were nice as shit to everybody. I mean, they were great guys, even to me, and they probably wouldn't remember me now, but they'd, hey man, how's it going? All right. And they were just making friends with everybody, flyering every show, going and seeing everyone else's band, and they were much more in the pretty boy glam thing, and they were letting everybody know, that they were really meant business in that world. So anyways, Poison was sort of becoming more like like a band that was moving up. And so a guy that was a friend of a friend was booking a night or two at the Troubadour, like one night a week or 2 nights a week. And I had called him trying to hustle gigs for my band, which was Hollywoodrose at the time, trying to help out instead of just having it be Izzy or A.X.L getting the gigs, because I had some different connections and stuff.
Sure.
Not necessarily in that world, but I was using the ones that I did have. If it was like in the Jackson Browne world or something, it would have been all over with, but no one was doing that. But
you were trying. You were pulling your weight.
Yeah, just helping out. And so I booked this gig, and he goes, I got this band Poison. And I go, oh yeah, I know those guys. And, oh, cool. I can get your band to play first or second on their show. It's Tuesday in August, blah, blah, blah. And so that show was in that, presented it to the guys, and they're like, right on, because we got these other shows like earlier in the summer and stuff like that. And then anyways, long story short, it was like, I kind of just, this date was approaching, and I kind of wasn't hearing from them, and getting the phone calls and stuff. And I had gotten rid of like some of my bass gear, and I didn't have a full setup all the time. So that was like, you know, kind of getting on their nerves. Like, you don't have an amp. We always have to borrow something or rent something. And so I showed up one day at the where they were rehearsing, you know, in my van. I had gotten a car, my own car by then, 64 Dodge van. And I showed up at the rehearsal place that they were rehearsing at, which was a different place, the Shamrock, where they actually had some of the early parties you might have seen flyers for, sort of after hours parties. And showed up there, and there's nobody there but Steve. He's like, "Hey, bro, what's going on?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, where's everybody?" "Oh, they'll be here later, you know." It's like, "So, well, you guys, what's going on for that gig? I mean, you think we're gonna do it, or we're gonna have to just call the guy and cancel?" He's like, No. Well, we've been working with this other guy." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It wasn't like bad. It was just sort of like, "Hey, bro, okay, well, take it easy, and come back in an hour. You know, Slash will be here or whatever." And I didn't go back, and then I actually went to this show with the Troubadour in August. Like, I just was in town and I bought by and was going to go see Poison and see what happened. And their name was on the bill. And I was like, no one really ever said anything. You know, the club didn't call and say, "Where are you guys?" You know, or "What's going on?" And Izzy and Bill didn't call, or A.X.L and Slash didn't call. And it was just sort of like, so I just went down there and was walking up, and of course there was hardly anybody there. The Troubadour, it wasn't a big there's probably, you know, 25 people there the whole night. And I was just walking, I'd parked the car, which was difficult. I had to park a couple blocks away, and I was walking up to the front, and there was nobody out there, and I just saw A.X.L like walk out, and he sees me, and he's kind of like bows his head a little bit, and like sort of in that sort of sincere but shameful look. I go, "Hey, how's it going? What happened? You guys are here, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." I go, "Did you play?" He's like, "Yeah." Because I feel bad, man. You know, like he was manning up to it, and he still didn't go into it. I go, "So, well, you just got somebody else then, right?" And he's like, yeah, we're gonna use this guy for a while." And I was like, "Okay, well, cool. Let's keep in touch." And I was a little bit bummed, but I kind of expected it, so it wasn't like, I just went, "Okay, well, whatever." These guys are always they'll be back.
No, but they weren't
I mean,
they weren't consistent. You were like, "All right, whatever." Yeah, okay.
The funny thing is that, like, in the, you know, decades of weird internet people trying to figure out who that bass player was between Steve Darrow and Duff McKagan, you know, it was like, still nobody really knows who that guy was. It wasn't Duff.
It was Ole.
It wasn't Ole.
Oh, it wasn't Ole.
No. It was some guy named Snake or Spider or something like that. And I still don't know who it is. And so I don't even know if they remember, to be honest, you know, but it was one of those other weird things you guys can all try to solve the mystery of.
I like that. Wow.
You let me know when you find out.
I will.
And then, so okay, so again, not long after that period, you know, I booked the show, and there's a flyer, which you might have seen. It's Slash drew the caricatures of all of us. And he drew all the flyers from when he was officially in the band. He started doing the flyers because he was a really good artist and stuff. A lot of them had his character. He had this girl named Shirley that was his sort of cartoon character that he has tattooed. One of his first ones that he had tattooed on.
Sure.
She had like a rose in the teeth, you know, really big teeth. And Shirley always like made her way onto the flyers and stuff in those days. It's kind of like that was his thing. And so there's a picture of me on the flyer, but I didn't actually play the show. And Poison played, and they played, and I don't know if, you know, they even talked to each other that night. I don't really know. It was way later after that Slash would audition for them. So, and then things got, you know, they frittered out again, like they did. They just went for a couple of while where no one really was sure what was going to happen next, and they were always looking for the right guys, you know, like the perfect guys. They'd get guys temporarily, but they're always looking for like the formula. And somewhere in the interim, at that point, you know, Pyrus had turned into LA Guns,
right?
And LA Guns,
and Hollywood Rose.
Well, LA Guns went in a bunch of different stages as well. They went from sort of basically just being pirates with a different name. Then they went into being like the Rob Jagos LA Guns, and then they went into being also sort of getting these punk guys in the early days, which was sort of where the scene I came out of, which was I thought was really strange. But they had gotten this guy Nicky Beat, the drummer, who was a legendary punk drummer from the Weirdos and the Bags and Venus and the Razor Blades. And he was in Chili Peppers early on, and he was like this older guy, but he had the mop black hair, and was simple. He too was getting sort of sick of hardcore and was looking to do something a little more rock and roll, because he was old enough to have been playing drums when Aerosmith was big, like the first time around. And then they got Paul, the singer, who was actually also a drummer. Paul Mars, I guess he calls himself, or Paul Black. And he was a drummer in these punk bands that we were playing with, like called the Mau Mau's, and he was in the Joneses, which were like a real kind of stonesy, dollsy punk band. And so Tracy had that going on, and then he had gotten the financial backer, Raz, who you probably heard about.
Raz Q, sure.
And then so there was all of a sudden all of his focus was on LA Guns, like even though they were sort of like second in line with like GN'R, Hollywood Rose. It's one point Izzy was even living with Tracy at his mom's place, literally like 100 yards from Fairfax High.
Oh, that's right.
School.
Yeah.
And Tracy. And so they had this crazy little apartment in Hollywood, or a duplex. His mom lived there and Tracy, and then they had like 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 like rock dudes would just like rent a floor space or a couch at Tracy's pad and stay there for however long. And so I remember going just in the interim when I knew I wasn't in the band, but I was still buddies with them. I was like, I get it, whatever. I'm looking for another band too. I figured I could sort of do better. Bad mistake. Yeah. But at that time, they didn't know. It was just
right. How could you know at that time?
Izzy would go, I'm at Tracy's, come pick me up and we can go to whatever, see the show. Just pick me up at 6 o'clock. It's over by Fairfax High, by Canners. I was like, okay. So I'd go, and like there'd be all these dudes at Tracy's house, and we'd kind of hang out and shoot the shit, and I got to know him and just see how, the weird little situation they had going there. And then A.X.L would come over, knock on the door, be Bill, and so it was just this. And so the bands were like that. I mean, if you really want to like just concentrate it, the bands were sort of like
incestuous.
The guy that replaced me and carried all came from this other band that, the drummer, it was like.
But it was cool that you were able to be friends with them after.
Yeah. I mean, it was, there was, I think the only time when things got a little weird temporarily was, so it's at some point after trying numerous times, like Hollywood Rose just didn't ever get off the ground, like they try, and Duff was probably on the radar of everyone at that point too, but whether or not he was already playing with other people too around town,
sure,
smaller bands, and at the time once LA Guns started getting shit going, because they had Raz, and they all of a sudden they had a van, and they had new equipment, and they had new clothes, and they had an EP out, and they had he was really like helping them hype the shit out of the band with paying for advertisements and all the stuff that you needed to get to be considered like a legit kind of Hollywood band. And so Tracy asked A.X.L to sing, and he just did it after, he knew that, I think he knew in his mind that, well, this is just an opportunity because I'm not doing anything else. I'm working at Tower Video.
I know. That's right. Raz got A.X.L to sing for LA Guns for like a little while.
Yeah. And so I remember going to a show as I might have even given one of them a ride, I don't remember, but at the Troubadour, something to do. And it was LA Guns opening for London, who was, of course, always a big headline Hollywood band, because that was the band Nikki Sixx and Blackie Lawless were in, and the guy from Mott the Hoople was the singer and all this stuff. But it was basically just different versions. So anyways, they could always like headline one of the nicer clubs in West Hollywood, and whoever they wanted, they could get to open. So it was like London and LA Guns. And at that point, Izzy had joined London, right? Because it was the same kind of deal. He was like, well, I'm not doing anything else. These guys know a lot of people. They get good shows. I'll just do it for a while. They look cool. They wear a lot of makeup, you know, and they chicks go and see them. You know, we're all there. Like when I was in the band and even before, they were always struggling to get like decent gigs, like gigs where there was a lot of people and people just really into it. It was always like not enough people, or the people that were there to see a different kind of rock, you know, and so it didn't go over always well, you know.
So it's safe to say that none of like any of their success had to have caught you off guard.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
when they finally became Guns N' Roses, like I guess where were you and what were you thinking? Because we've obviously gone over the story where it took like a year for Appetite to break.
Yeah.
But when you, I guess two different things. When you first heard, okay, here's Guns N' Roses, what did you think? And then when Guns N' Roses finally became, whoa, Guns N' Roses, I guess, where were you? What did you think of that?
Well, the thing is like it was different, like being here in LA and being plugged into that scene and those people, because I was still, you know, sort of friends with them. I didn't see them as much because they, you know, they'd all got into different drugs and things and different habits and moved on, and they had money from the, you know, the label, the signing advance. So they, you know, they were sort of like having fun, and they were sequestered at the same time, you know, like the management had them. So this is after they've signed with Geffen, but even before that, like from the point of say, like, you know, 85 to 86. I mean, they got signed in 86, I think. Did the record come out in 86 or 87?
87.
Okay, so they got signed in 86. And I was out of the band by, you know, 85-ish, maybe a little into 85. So, but in that interim, say 85, that's when it was sort of like, okay, this is when they, you know, after the Hell tour, they'd gotten Duff, they'd solidified, they'd gotten rid of Steve Adler's, you know, huge drum set. They sort of, you know, toned down the metal and made it more straight rock and roll, and they toned down some of the punkiness and made it a little more arena. You know, there's just they had really sort of all come together and focused on their thing, and they were starting to finally get those gigs that they wanted to. Like they were able to open for some, like they'd open for Kix when they played at the Troubadour, you know.
Okay.
And Kix were the band that we all knew from the back of Hit Parader magazine. You know, they were from like Pennsylvania or something, and they finally came out here, and you know, they got to open for them, and then they got to open for some of the bigger local bands, and then they started getting their own crowd, and then people were going, oh, when are you guys going to play like headline and stuff? When are you going to play Orange County? When are you going to play, you know, Santa Barbara? When are you going to play in the Inland Empire and stuff like that? You know, like the suburbs of around here, not just Hollywood, you know, but like
right.
It would be like our version of the tri-state area, you know, like.
I gotcha.
And it's like if you equate it to the Twisted Sister movie, when they just pretty much just played Long Island, and then the second that they branched out to those other places, they went, you know, every gig they got more and more and more.
That's
people,
a good analogy, sure.
you know? But they were never that big to begin with, so that's where the analogy's got to stop, because GN'R was never, even at the shittiest Twisted Sister show, there's probably 150 people, you know, like in the bar days when they were playing cover songs, you know.
Fair, yeah.
The GN'R was still, you know, plenty of times it was just our girlfriends if we had them, and you know, Tracy and Mark, and that's it.
So were you surprised, I guess, when they got signed?
Well, so it was a thing,
right?
Because like I was saying, okay, so you're saying in the timeline you're at 85 to 86, right? There was this trajectory of them becoming a big local band before getting signed together. They didn't just go from like, we got Duff, we got signed to Geffen, we're platinum. It didn't. It seemed like that to everyone else. I think by the time the record came out, like by the time Appetite came out, it just was like, I mean, it was on MTV that day, it seemed like, you know, and then it just rose and rose and rose and rose and rose from there. Rose meaning rising.
I gotcha.
But there was this interim of a year or so when they were like, that was the real chaotic time. I mean, that was like when it was just as shaky as it was in the days when I was playing with them, but they had more at stake because they were getting a good following, and they were getting the right people to come and see him, and the right people involved, and the right people hearing him, and then different substances started coming in and making things better or worse, whatever, you know. There was even a time when there was another Hollywood Rose gig that was spearheaded by Izzy, where Slash wasn't involved at all, and we did it on a New Year's Eve in San Pedro, which is like, you know, an hour south of here, like a coastal town. And another one of those things when Izzy had been in, like, you know, London and been quit or fired or whatever, and was like, okay, I'm ready to do something. I'm in London now. I got a name going. I got like clout, you know. We got to get this glam thing going again. And I had actually been in a couple bands and not, you know, just wasn't happy. And I'd actually sent an audition tape to Hanoi Rocks, because at this point it was like Razzle had been killed when they were supposed to play here, and, you know, gotten in touch with them, like, you guys need a drummer, I'll move to England, you know. I play drums, and that never happened, of course. But so Izzy was like, okay, well, I've met a handful of new people, and I got this gig booked. And a lot of times it would work that way. A lot of times you'd call a club and say, okay, I got June 27th, and it would be April or May, and they go, okay, well, I got the gig, so now I got to get a band. You know, and they'd work it out. They'd work it out. And then sometimes there wouldn't be a band the next day or a week later. And sometimes it would, that was, you know, so anyways, there was a lot of shit going on in that time when they were just starting to, like, you know, play locally and be a headlining local band. And so I saw that rise, and then they got signed, and they were still no one knew who they were outside of LA. I mean, they were doing better stuff, obviously, and they had some money, but the Joe public anywhere outside of California didn't know who they were. There was nothing, you know. So it was when Appetite came out, and when they started hooking up on the bigger tours and stuff like that through Geffen, then they exploded. So I actually saw this sort of blurry, like, and there was times, I swear, I'd get news from the camp, you know, because we stayed friends with, we had mutual friends, and
okay,
I'd see them occasionally, girlfriends. We just get news every week. There was more soap opera from the Guns camp, you know, and it was just sort of like a little heavier than it was back then, because they sort of, you know, they, like I said, they had a little money, they had a little substance, they started getting like serious girlfriends or serious strippers taking care of them, and, you know, serious other bands starting to take notice, and the whole scene was moving in that direction, you know, like the whole genre was sort of like starting to happen. And it's funny because, you know, Faster Pussycat and I think LA Guns even got signed before they did, like, to majors. Like, I know Faster Pussycat got signed to Elektra and Jet Boy like a year before GN'R did, and they were sharing bills and they were friends and, you know, stuff in those days. But they were like sort of, those bands and stuff were like sort of slated to be the next big thing, you know. More
they
so
were supposed to be like Guns N' Roses before, you know.
Yeah,
Guns N' Roses was a thing.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So did you hear then? You know, obviously you heard the early stages of some of these songs that would end up on Appetite.
Yeah.
When you heard Appetite, when you heard Anything Goes in that version, did you get it? Maybe like why why Guns N' Roses elevated to the heights that they did, as opposed to a Jet Boy or maybe some other bands? Was it different to you being so immersed in the situation? Did it sound different to you? Did you be like, wow?
Honestly, I was a bit surprised. I was like, really? Because I knew, it's like knowing somebody from high school, and then, you know, when they're 25, they've changed their name, they've got a completely different look, and they're like, oh, that was what I was before, I'm this other guy now, you know. And you talk to them and you're like, you say their old name and they don't look at you, you know, and then you say their new actor name or their rock name and they're like, oh. You know, it's like they sort of had really retooled like a lot of the stuff. I mean, the songs like you mentioned, like that were Anything Goes and Shadow, and stuff like that. They were way different than we were doing them before. And if you basically, in a nutshell, if you took like Accept and Motorhead and mushed them with, Aerosmith and Nazareth, that's kind of where we were, where everything was fast, double bass, real aggressive, but with that, 70s rock and roll coming from the Aerosmith side and the Nazareth side and stuff like that, and AC/DC and stuff like that. But with that early 80s, like frantic sort of aggression. And so all that stuff got stripped away and got sort of, brought in more bluesy, brought in more melody, and slowed down everything significantly, just in the music part. And then I think Appetite too is so all over the place, like song-wise, because in a good way, but like because of different writers. Izzy had his more say on certain songs that would be the earlier songs, or the more kind of bluesy, heartbreaky kind of songs. And then of course the big riffy songs were, like Welcome to the Jungle, and tons of riffs and a lot of lead parts, and wah wah and stuff like that, was obviously Slash. And then the ballads and stuff was more like A.X.L, and so that was a surprise. And I just was surprised that it got as big as it did, because every is just like, all of a sudden it was like the band that everyone was into. And it was like, well, we were kind of always there in a weird way. You just weren't. I could have told you that, 2 years ago. I told you I had this band, and we wanted to play with you. And you're like, no. And the whole music industry like treated them different afterwards too. I mean, even the people that they were, associated with early on as they were climbing up, the touring, like you've probably heard the story about when they opened for Alice Cooper in Santa Barbara, right?
Which one? Remind me, because there's like so many.
It was basically one of the first, oh, where's A.X.L? He's really late incidents.
Okay.
Got, because it was a bigger show. It happened around town at like little clubs, but it happened to a lot of people on that level. So it wasn't a big deal, but it was like it was at Interims. Alice had just made his big comeback in '86, right? With Constrictor, I guess, right? So he hadn't been doing anything for years, and he was retooling his whole band and his whole image to be more 80s metal, right? And in an interim, he would do these warm-up shows in like the suburbs before he'd go on a full tour. Like he'd do them like an hour outside of LA, San Bernardino, Santa Barbara. Full on the same production in a nice big place or a medium-sized place, but it just would be like a warm-up show, like before they were unadvertised, and stuff like that. And Gunsnroses got asked to be, because they were the Cat House Club with Ricky Rockman and A.X.L, and they were all a big part of that scene. And Alice's people were sort of hanging around, noticing that this is where the people are, the people that we need to reach are in this pool. We need to start grabbing from this pool of people. So they got GN'R. They'd been signed, but still no record. No one knew who they were yet. They got to play in Santa Barbara in a big stage, opening for Alice, which was all of our idols, even them. And we went to the show, and it was they were all up on stage, set up, and we're okay. And then we're like, kind of like, you only got like a 40-minute set or something, because you're the opening band and no one really cares. They want to see Alice. And they were like just stalling a little bit, 5 minutes. And it's like, and there's like, A.X.L's not here. It's like, well, where is he? It's like, I don't know. He called from somewhere. He said he was just leaving the valley. And it was like, half hour before it was time to be on stage, and it's an hour and a half drive, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so they stalled and stalled and stalled. And then finally they said, the Alice people were furious. Like they were like, what the fuck is this? We give you guys a chance, you know.
Right.
This is what we get. And it's funny because that was one of Alice's tricks. If you read any, I'm a huge fan. It's like Alice would be up in the dressing room watching a hockey game or a horror movie, and he'd like Madison Square Garden would be like, he'd be an hour and a half late to go on stage because he had to finish this movie, you know. But at the same time, his people they didn't think it was fun.
Sure.
So it turns out A.X.L actually sort of showed up, but they were like, fuck it, we got to start playing. Let's just play. Let's play some instrumental. We got to make some sound because we only got 15 minutes to play now because they started playing some songs, and like Izzy would like kind of try to sing, and you could tell that they were just like, oh shit. And then Ronnie Snyder, who was probably know his name, he was in Road Crew, the bass player, and he was one of the early, you know, roadies for Guns N' Roses, like the whole first kind of wave of tours that they did. He was like the right hand man because he was buddy of Slash's and stuff. He was like the roadie, and he came up and they said, you want to sing? And they did a whole lot of Rosie AC/DC because they used to do that in their set, you know, or some AC/DC song. And he kind of got through it, but it wasn't like at an A.X.L level. And then they were sort of like, okay, thank you, good night. And people were just sort of like, what happened, you know? Was Alice come on? And then, I mean, even I was friends with some of the Alice people, manager, Mint, and they were like backstage, you know, going, okay, we fucked up. You know, not only we're going to set an example, not only will you not ever play with Alice Cooper again, but we're going to make sure that you have a really hard time playing anywhere. Like almost like a mafia move, you know?
Yeah, right.
And then within a year, they were like best buds. Hey, come on, yeah, come on stage with me, you know? And it was like they sort of, you know, cross each other in the trajectory of
for your perspective, it just seemed like everything that could have gone wrong for this band did.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden for them,
and somehow or another they were able to fly straight and land, you know, the skin of their teeth, you know. And that's kind of like looking back on it, that's kind of the lore of, or the sort of thing with GN'R is just like, it was just who knows, like a cloud of dust. Like that's part of their appeal, was like you never knew when something like that was going to just fall apart or
mysterious.
Yeah. And you know, they claim that it made its way into their sound and into their vibe. And, you know, okay, the first record cover was banned instantly, you know, like the painting, the Robert Williams and stuff like that. And so that was like, okay, well, that's off to a good start, you know, but it just sort of helped everything in the long run, you know. It's like the controversy kind of just added to the, you know, hugeness, I think.
How often did you, because you mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to have to do a part 2. I don't want to keep you here that much longer. This is like the longest episode I've done in a long time.
Sorry.
No, it's all right, because I enjoy talking to you. And, you know, it's when there's a guest that deserves the time, you know, then like, yeah, let's go into overtime.
Yeah, we can do part 2 if you want one day.
Maybe we'll do you and Roy Orbison. The same episode. That
I had a funny story about his brother too, but I'll tell that in part 2.
Okay.
The other Orbison.
So I want the few things I want to get into before we wrap up, especially, you know, it's things that you're doing now with Sister Midnight. So but you mentioned earlier in the interview that you have spoken to Slash, I guess, somewhat recently. Like how often, like, did you stay friends? Like, who did you stay friends with?
Well, it's weird
after they got big.
Izzy was, like I said, Izzy and Bill were the first bros in that set of people that I stayed in touch with, and they were always cool. And then even early on, like Izzy just checked out. He just checked out. It had a lot to do with the lifestyles and the addictions and stuff that were going on. It's like if you weren't in that set of doing that sort of stuff, people don't want to have anything to do with you, you know. So I didn't talk to him for years, still haven't. Even before he went AWOL, even like before the real Where's Izzy, it was like before they got signed, he was sort of checked out. And it was too bad because we're the ones that like hung out the most. And Slash was the one who, you know, knew the most recent, you know, of the people. And I'm still in touch with him on and off. He still lives around here somewhere, you know, and I'll see him some different events, and I'll get in touch with him. And he's very cool. You know, the other people are sort of behind their, the management wall, or
The moat, the metaphoric moat that surrounds them.
I mean, I haven't tried to get a hold of Bill or anything like that, but I imagine that there's never any problem that I know of between me and any of those guys. You know, there was never that one fist fight or the one like, so it was just more of a matter of like, and so there's really no reason, and I got nothing against him personally, anybody. So, but they've all gone through so many different changes from then to now. Even the like post reunion changes that they've all gone through, and then we had 2020 in the middle of all that, which fucked everybody up and changed everyone's priorities and perspectives and plans. And
absolutely
who knows how much money was made or lost in their world.
If anything, though, I want him to say to you, "Thank you for naming me Axl Like, if that's the truth, like, to at least for him to, because he has a great memory, according to Doug Goldstein, their former manager,
and Slash too.
So someone's got to remember how that that Axl thing happened, because if you did it, you should deserve credit.
I know. I never even got a gold record. My name's on the record. I mean, it's like there's plenty of people who are like, you pay the $140 and you can get a gold record if you're somehow connected with it, and they got them, and that's the biggest thing in their house. And I never, but Slash was still Saul, and he was, wanted to be called Slash, but it was sort of took a while before everyone really like did it, and
was a trip.
So yeah, the Axl, like I said, they always thought that me and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, they always thought we were like way weirder than anyone else. Like, you guys say really weird stuff. It's cool and everything, but and like they called us the Munsters. Nice. They referred to me and her as the Munsters are here, and that's kind of as weird as we were. I mean, coming from somebody who that whole group of people that were probably involved with so way more depravity and decadence and weirdness and abuse, mental, physical, whatever, than I had ever been, exposed to be considered weird is kind of an honor, but we're really not that weird. We're just kind of weird in an Addams Family way,
I'm into it. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's just,
I'm looking forward to the new Monsters film by Rob Zombie. I hope that's going to be good.
I'm kind of not, to be honest, but that's a whole other thing.
All right. So, but then here's, I guess, the segue, because with Slash, if I ever got the opportunity to speak with him, a lot of it will be about horror films. And looking at your background, and I got to ask, who is that lovely lady behind you? Is that your? No,
that's it's not. It
looks like from a film.
It is. It's from this. There's this paperback from the movie called Candy from 1968. It's kind of one of my favorite films growing up. Very weird, obscure cult Euro kind of psychedelic. It was basically like the psychedelic Lolita film that was made, and it had all these huge actors in it, but it should have been as big as anything, and it wasn't, because it was produced, it was part German, part Italian, part French, 3 different directors, blah blah blah. But it had, her, and she was like Miss Teen Sweden 1965 or something like that. So she just like went straight into like making these kind of funny sexy Euro movies. And
it just sounds like the kind of, you would just look on Slash's social media and Instagram, and it sounds like all the things that you're interested in, and you do.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, because I am a fan. Every time I see one of those things, like, that's cool, and I look on it, and it's like Slash's post. I'm like, dude, wasn't so much like that back then, but definitely now, like, we're eye and eye on that kind of stuff.
Well, maybe
same with Rob Zombie and any of those people, Jonas Ackerlund. I mean, we're all just rock and rollers who were into rock, into weird shit back then, and rock and roll was just sort of a way to bring that in, and once those guys all became, wealthy and had enough power and knew enough people to make those things a reality, they did. And I certainly would probably do the same thing if I had that behind me.
Well, I'm hoping, but to also put something else out into the universe, that you and Slash can collaborate on this Sister Midnight thing. Can you tell us about it? Because it's really interesting. It seems like up Slash's alley, what you're doing.
Well, I actually hadn't even thought of asking him, because I think he's got better things to do. Same with that.
But you know him. He plays with anybody. He always up for a collaboration.
To get to the point of to the meat of well, how did you feel when you saw GN'R get big? And were you pissed? Were you hurt? Were you disappointed? Or did you want to commit suicide? Yes and no. The biggest thing that got to me at the time, that I was so surprised at the time, was how much they did, even before the record came out. I mean, it was right before that and up until, they broke big. It was literally they were jumping on stage with everybody who came through LA. I mean, they were on stage with Cheap Trick. They were on stage with Alice, in the Penelope Spheris movie, they were on stage with, Iggy Pop, and all the rock bands and the metal bands. And it was just kind of that was the thing that you did. It was one of the Guns N' Roses guys would show up all fucked up and say, "Hey man, I want to play a song with you." And they'd go, "Okay." And it was that's, I mean, more than the money in those days, that was the thing that was "Hey, wait a minute." But and there's still Slash just continued to be that guy from Michael Jackson on down, to everybody. And
to have those opportunities,
able to play with Ozzy and be actually almost be in Black Sabbath, and being able to be in all those bands, and just even the Pink Floyd thing and the Cream things. I mean, all these really super duper, not just okay, well, this is a hair metal reunion, you get to come up and jam with Skid Row, or you get to come up and play with Cinderella. It's he's playing with the guys, Hendrix's band and Clapton's band, and the guys. He's became one of the guys, the big guys,
But people, so with that, because people actually ask you if you thought about committing suicide after.
Yeah.
I mean, but did you really think about did you really have a depression, or it was just whoa, how did this happen? Or
it was both. It was both, but at the same time, I was sort of I was relieved knowing that I probably would have left on my own at some point, whether I came back or not, when things were leveled out a little bit, which they seem to never have happened,
Right.
I was just not into the drama. And same, I went through punk rock years of just everyone being chaotic and on drugs and drama, and managed to just go, you know what, I think I can just find some people who just want to make some shit happen. And, they seemed like they were into the same thing too. And so it clicked. And then I probably I've left bands for a lot less drama than they had.
You can't change that. I mean, that's the way it was.
And that's also, again,
that's who you were.
Formula that makes them exciting, I guess. And same with LA Guns. I mean, I was played a lot of different projects with Tracy over the years after they sort of became big, and he didn't need to come back and talk to his old friends, but he did, and I saw him more than I'd ever see Slash and A.X.L and stuff like that. And we jammed a lot, and we were supposed to do all kinds of things together, and they'd fall apart before he'd get off the ground, or I'd get booted out. We went to New York actually and played in the mid '80s with it was me and Tracy and this singer who was a Penthouse pet, who flew us all out from LA to back her up. She wanted to be a singer.
Wow.
And then it was, she wanted the cool LA, crazy street rock glamour people to come to New York and sort of show them how it was done, Then we got the guy that was in later, two guys that were in Kingdom Come, remember them?
Mm-hmm.
Kingdom Come, they were a big 80s, Zeppelin type metal band. And so it was Tracy and I and those two guys, and we backed her up, and nothing ever happened. It seemed like it was going to, and there was all kinds of talk of labels and magazines, and everyone followed her because she was Penthouse Pet and she was very big in the club scene there, and everyone wanted a piece of that, but nothing ever really came out, no recordings or anything. So I stayed, you know, buddies with Tracy, and then it turns out that they lived like down the street from me when I was living closer to Melrose. All those guys lived in the same neighborhood, like a block away. So we'd see each other a lot. And he kind of became that guy after the 90s, and sort of all the lesser hair metal bands sort of took a dive in popularity, and he became the guy that would play with anyone. You know, he was like jamming with all kinds of people. Because that's the thing with another thing between, it's always a big rivalry between Tracy and Slash in school and everything. And the bottom line is that they both can play. They both are good guitar players, and a lot of guys in that scene weren't. They were able to do one thing to get, like, they had a Van Halen trick and that was all they could do, or they had a Johnny Thunders, New York Dolls, Trash kind of vibe, but they never could really go beyond that. And both Tracy and Slash, especially Slash, like, he can, like I said, he can jam with Clapton's people, or he could jam with the punk people, or he could jam with the Foo Fighters, or he could, you know what I mean, and like, and be on TV like Conan O'Brien or something like that. And play circles around everybody, you know. And so that was a difference in that too, you know, that they're actually good players and they just want to play guitar. You know?
Did you get a chance to see Guns N' Roses after? Have you seen the band that we now know as GN'R?
Not since the reunion.
Okay.
I actually inquired about getting tickets for Dodger Stadium because I thought that would be like something that could be easy to happen. And they told me how much it would be for me to get tickets.
Great.
And I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of a lot. To be on the guest list and have it be $300 a piece is kind of, you know, I mean, some people out there are going, holy shit, I would have paid 4 times that much. But at the same time, it was like, well, I was buddies with the guy who was in the Cult who opened for them too. And neither of them could make it happen, you know. And I said, okay, well, I'll see you some other time.
I want to know if that actually gets back to A.X.L. If A.X.L hears that Steve Darrow would like to come, or if that's just the moat around it.
I think it's the moat. And if it is, you know, again, that's when you get to a certain point. I mean, I've only seen it from the, you know, the bleachers. Like, I mean, I know plenty of people who've gotten real successful, and when you get to that plateau, there's so much other shit that just, there's lawyers and there's promoters and there's insurance, and then there's like the hangers honors, and then there's the family, and then there's the family's lawyers, you know, and all these different levels of like stuff that you have to, okay, we need 50 tickets for, you know, and then when there's kids involved, it's just okay,
like, I get it. I do, but there's got to be some, like, it's just people talking. Hey, Steve Darrow, who gave you your name. You haven't seen each other in a long time. You know, maybe give him a $50 ticket instead of exactly. I don't know. I mean,
that would have happened. That could have happened. You know, again, he's got more important people to worry about that are maybe not on his A-list, you know, that are way higher up in the hierarchy of things than I am, you know.
Well, it might make you feel better that Roy Orbison spent $1,000 on his ticket, but he's got that Pretty Woman money. So, was
that in back east somewhere, or
no? He's going to the LA show.
Wow.
He's going to the LA show.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean,
good for him.
That's the kind of the thing. Like, I mean, going back to the you know, them opening for Alice Cooper and his warm-up show. I mean, I was just happy to be get into the show for free, and I got in through Alice Cooper, and I was like, see, you know, I can. This is really cool. I mean, you guys got your thing. You guys, you know, got the people at the bar that you can let in, and the strippers and stuff. But, you know, this is kind of more like, this is the real business. And then now that they are beyond the real business, you know, I mean, there's so much more to worry about. But at the same time, I know Slash, and I know people who know him for a long time, and I know that.
Well, then we got to go back to Slash and you working together. So I want you to tell us about your project, because it's a really cool, interesting thing you have going on with Sister Midnight.
The Sister Midnight is just something I've been doing pretty much 99% by myself for the last year and a half or so. and it was sort of a spin-off of my other band, Sonic Medusa, that's been together for a good little while, but nothing much has been happening with them. We put out an EP like, a few years back, and there's just a sort of like lag between recording. We've got a recording done and everything. It's just not mixed right, and it's not going to be released for a while because 2020 put a big, it's just pushed everything back. So Sister Midnight was just basically something, me doing cover songs that I always wanted to do, or stuff that was different out of the sphere of what the band was doing,
Because they're not just cover songs. They're
well, they are cover songs that I'm doing, but they're
but I mean, not. But tell us like what of what.
Well, I do it's all been pretty obscure so far. To me, it seems normal, but that's what I listen to. I listen to stuff that's not on everybody's radar. I've done a handful of horror movie, like theme songs from horror movies. I did, there was a cheap horror film from 1980 called New Year's Evil. And there was like, it was supposed to be set in like the new wave era of LA, like mohawks and spandex and striped pants. But the band that they got to be the band in the movie was super metal. And they just cut mohawks and wore funny clothes, but they were like, sounded like, really good, like late 70s Judas Priest, like total, new wave of British metal kind of sound. And so I covered that song because every time it was on late night, I'd be like, the song is so cool. Why hasn't anybody done it? So
I love that because the soundtrack, I'm into horror. I'm into Ninja Turtles and Ghostbusters, but I'm into horror as well. And those old, I get it. So what's the name of that? New Year's Evil?
New Year's Evil, yeah. It was.
I don't think I've seen that yet.
It was like a C movie, not even a B movie. A C.
I love it. Is it on Tubi TV? Hey, do you go to that?
It pops. You can get it on even YouTube for free. Okay. It pops up every New Year's. It pops up especially, and
I'll watch it. See, that's to me. It sounds like something Slash would want to do.
One big star named Roz Kelly.
Okay.
Who was actually played a part on Happy Days in the 70s.
Okay.
So then I did another horror movie. I've done a few horror movies. I did one called Shiver of the Vampires, which was a GN'R and a French director. He did a series of really weird sort of vampire / erotic / psychedelic cheap movies in Europe in the early 70s. And the vampire, he had like 3 vampire movies that were sort of his, like the sort of pinnacle of his work, and Shiver the Vampire is the nude vampire, and one called Fascination. And so there was a theme song of that movie that sounded like it was a really cool tune, and it was set in the graveyard, and like steam and this headstones and bats flying around, but it was done in a different way, like not like your typical sort of Vincent Price horror movie. It was a little bit more bizarre and cheap, I guess. And the song sounds like the original song was by this teenage, prog band from France called Arcanthus. And the song sounded like really, really, really early Pink Floyd meets, almost like but it had this really dark Black Sabbath-y feel to it. And I always wanted that to have more of, when I was watching the movie, I wanted that song to just be that much heavier, so I did it. And it was instrumental, so I didn't have to worry about getting a singer because I don't sing. And then I did, so that was one of my favorite ones. I just kind of bucket list song. And then I did another one that's gotten the most attention, not mainstream in any way, but it gotten on a lot of other radio shows and video podcasts and stuff. And it was this theme to the movie called Psychomania from England. And the movie was like made in 1973, but it looks like it should have been made in like 1968. It was like kind of that sort of behind the times, but it was about this motorcycle gang in England. They weren't like the Hells Angels type gang. They were sort of like, they had leather jackets and they wore these helmets that had these like skulls painted on the front. And they hung out in a graveyard, and the graveyard was more like Stonehenge. It looked like this, real British goth kind of set. And they'd go around and terrorize people in the town and do funny things. And it turns out they'd found the secret of eternal life. And it wasn't vampirism. It was like this secret that you could kill yourself, and if you really wanted to, you could come back and you were invincible. So the leader of the gang kills himself. They bury him with his motorcycle in the middle of this field. They throw the dirt on him, and then like in the middle of the night, the motorcycle rides out of the grave, a cloud of dust, just like Motorhead did in the Killed by Death video.
Nice.
Which I'm sure they borrowed it from that. And anyways, the theme tune for that, the whole soundtrack of that movie was always a favorite of mine. And it's mostly instrumental, and it's really dark and really groovy. It's not heavy in the metal sense, but it's dark and gloomy, and lots of Hammond organ and sort of a, Deep Purple meets the Doors kind of a way. But
I'm into it. See, this just seems, again, up Slash's alley. So I don't know. I'm gonna put it out in the universe.
Put it out in the universe.
Slash, Sister Midnight featuring Slash for some obscure.
We could even call him Saul Hudson if he wants to be.
I don't know. It's
fine. Contractually bound by somebody else,
Maybe, I don't know. Find
and
something like. What's
I'm
your favorite?
Looking for other singers too. If there's anybody out there that's a legit rock singer, male, female, looking for people in different languages, because there's songs I have planned in German,
cool.
Swedish, Spanish, French. There's all kinds of international obscure heavy rock from the past that no one, it's just sort of starting to come. If you look for it, you can find it nowadays, but it's fascinating to me,
Right on. So people can find Sister Midnight at facebook.com/midnight neckbite. Right. And you're also on Instagram at Sister Midnight Mania. And right. You're on Bandcamp as well.
Bandcamp. Yeah, Bandcamp has all the tunes for free to listen to. You can download them if you want. Ripple Music, a label that Sonic Medusa recorded with, also released the first maybe year's worth of Sister Midnight stuff on their website for free, as if you subscribe to their network of bands. There's freebies that he puts out, and he's doing Sister Midnight in there, so you can find it there. I actually have a few things there's one on iHeartRadio, one of my tunes.
Okay.
There's one song that made it to all the more mainstream platforms like iTunes and Amazon and iHeartRadio and Deezer and all that.
That's great.
You can find it there. There's also another Sister Midnight out there. Maybe more than one, because it's such an obvious name, named after an Iggy song from The Idiot, which I literally was releasing the first song. I didn't know what to call it. And I just remember when I was 12 or 13, I wanted to call a band Sister Midnight, and I never did. So I just said, let's try that. And I'll change it later. It's kind of stuck. And it kind of adds to the well, is it some chick? Is it a vampire chick? Is it, nobody really knows it's me.
Yeah, it took a second. I was like, wait, does he have a band with a girl? Okay.
Yeah. Well, because I have a girl singing on a couple of the tunes. The girl that I worked with, Amy, and she's a great singer, and she was more like the bass player in this band I was playing with a long time ago. And then some of the stuff that I choose vocally, especially the soundtrack stuff from that era, that a lot of it has that sort of almost choir church, almost like something Ghost would do in one of their songs or something, the big spooky sounding evil choir kind of stuff. So I need people that can actually do that type of singing, not just basic rock and roll.
Right on. This is a very cool project.
So I'm doing that until the Sonic Medusa gets the next record out, until something else comes along, blah blah blah. But I'm hoping to I have a lot of things done that I have interesting people on, from all people that I've known in the past, that I'm just hoping to talk more people into doing it with me for not a lot of accolades or money,
well, keep me posted.
It's weird because I started it in probably 2018, 2019, right? And then 2020 came along, and then everybody is like, hey, there's Paul Stanley doing a jam with somebody else in another town from his living room, and there's the Foo Fighters. Yeah. So I'm kind of doing the same thing, remote recording with different people. I had one singer in Washington, and I had another guy in New York send me tapes, and some of the stuff I did here. And so it was kind of seemed like sort of a novel idea before lockdown to do stuff like that a little bit. And I'm still going to do it that way if that's what it takes, but I
Okay.
haven't played live obviously because it's just me playing all the instruments, and it's
Well,
not one of those like there's some people that do that are programmed, and they use synthesizers and
mhm.
drum loops, and they're able to do it more mechanically. Mine's just straight up rock and roll background, so everything has to be played with drums and bass and guitars and tambourines and stuff live, and real Hammond organs and all that stuff. So I have to do that piece by piece and record it all track by track, and then get the singers to come in and do it.
Right on.
So that's the idea, is to do something that's like that, but it still has the sound of a full rock band.
I'm into it. Like I said, I'm into it, and I hope Slash is into it, because that it just seems like it's too perfect. It's too perfect.
Yeah, man. There's stuff that there's stuff that I've recorded that him or somebody with that same taste would just like nail.
Yeah.
I've done a Nazareth song. I got a UFO song in the pipeline, got, stuff like that. So it's just a matter of finding the right people. But
Well, I'm
if
glad
I can't find them, I'll do it myself.
Right on. Well,
The way I look at it.
It's awesome to hear that you're doing things that you love now,
Yeah.
and all the way back from the goth
Mhm.
rock that you grew up with.
Mhm.
You're kind of making it your own thing now in your own way, and
Yeah.
doing something really creative with
Thanks
it.
for pointing that out, because I think if people do even at all know what I've done, if they see me as a musician and like, okay, Steve, you were the guy that was in Guns N' Roses, you were the guy that was in Christian Death, you were the guy that was like the glam guy, it's like they think that I should be in a 2021 goth cyber band, or they think I should be in a kick-ass bluesy cowboy boot bandana band like GN'R was, or and it's like I'm sort of somewhere in between all that, and that's kind of why I'm doing it, because it's like if nobody else wants to do it with me, I'll do it myself, and I don't really give a shit.
Right on. I love it. I love it.
Thanks.
Steve, thank you so much. I enjoy talking to you. This is like the longest episode I've done in a while, and I know
Sorry. You
no,
can edit.
no, not at all. My listeners were looking forward to it. Like I said, I want to do part 2, maybe get Roy Orbison Jr. in on that. That might be fun. Just like you with what the pandemic has done with you're coordinating with people all over the world. That's what the
Yeah.
pandemic has done with podcasting. I really wasn't doing
Yeah.
Zoom stuff before. So it's
Yeah.
cool to get a chance to see you, to see the guy who is part of Guns N' Roses history, and as you all are, you're so much more than that one little part in history.
Well,
It's about,
thanks for noticing that too, because a lot of people don't see it that way, if they see it at all.
we all got a huge story, and I think that's just badass that you have Guns N' Roses as part of your story. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's not really. It's weird that it's taken 30 plus years for it to come out. Like, oh, there was another guy, the fifth Beatle or whatever.
I know.
And it's like I said, I've been interviewed plenty of times over the past, even in the late 80s and early 90s for projects that never have probably seen the light of day, because they were like a book or something like that. And they never got released. And then how else, before the internet, how else would you have known about things like that, and
Mhm.
it was never included in any behind the musics or any kind of things like that. So
this is your behind the music, Steve Darrow.
Yeah. And then like I think with Mark's book, there was supposedly like a mysterious, like it was up for like being redone as a film,
Mhm.
which never happened.
Yeah, it was supposed to be James Franco was involved in it, and man,
Yeah, I mean,
this
who knows?
band. I mean, that's why people like Idiot Me, who just does a Guns N' Roses podcast. People love it because there's not a lot about the band out there, especially it's the same story told over and over again.
Yeah.
Not yours though, and not Raz Q's story, and not people like that.
They were, I mean, even like I said, even in the early days before anything happened with them successfully, there was a lot of people in their weird little pool of girls, especially ones that weren't wives, just that helped them out, whether they were strippers or, girls with a good job or managers, and, just all kinds of friends and stuff that were like around, just that saw something in the guys,
Well, I'm hoping, and I don't think I'm letting any secret out of the bag, but there's somebody who is trying to work on a Fairfax script,
Oh yeah.
and actually a listener of mine. I'll give him a shout out. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet. He sent me. It was forgive me. He sent me just like a long. He's writing a script, so a fan is
Oh,
writing a script as well. I hope I didn't delete that by accident.
yeah.
Well, but
Well,
no,
that's a whole other,
I'll
yeah, that's
find
a
it.
whole other source of like, because I didn't go there. Had I gone there, if I was in the area a little bit earlier, it would have been all over with. I would have been, oh man, there would have been way more people. But I mean, there was like, Flea and Anthony and
Right.
Lenny Kravitz and besides Slash and Tracy Guns and everyone's family in those families and a lot of people who were not really like a lot of actors and Donovan's kid, the pop singer Donovan, his kid Dono, who became sort of like a model. Like they were all went there, and a lot of punk people went there.
Again,
And then people that
so
were in
much.
like industry, like writers and directors and stuff, that they went there because they lived in Hollywood and that's what their family was doing or that they wanted to do and stuff. So it's that's what we can do for future. We can tie that in. I got a story about Roy Orbison's brother, and it has to do with Fairfax High and Kat Von D.
Oh, okay, right on. And it's Delclan. He just sent me a listener of mine. He sent me. So there's people trying to make the GN'R movie. We'll see if it ever happens. But
yeah, I mean that can just be one chapter in the Fairfax saga,
or Steve, you can write. You're writing the score maybe to like a horror version of Guns N' Roses.
It looks until just a couple of months ago, it looked like a horror movie set driving by there because it's been boarded up for a whole year, and that whole part of Melrose where Fairfax High is just become like very weird lately. Like it was never ever like that, and so things will get back to normal. But it's become more like one of those apocalyptic Night of the Living Dead type of scene.
Oh, fun, right up our alley.
Yeah,
we like that. So, can you believe it? I mean, I've done 270. This is 278. Yeah, and we've been talking for, oh my God, has it really been almost 3 hours? And we still feel like it's been the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with Rich Beanstalk, and in his book, I remember it was about a 3-hour phone conversation, and
this might be the longest episode I've ever done, to be honest with you.
Sorry.
And that's all right. I think that.
I mean, if you write in the book, I got 3 lines in that, book, and a couple lines in a couple other books, and so they're able to edit out my blah blah blah. But so your people have to sit through it if they've made it this far. We should give them a prize if they make it to all the way to the end credits of your show or whatever. Give them something.
All right. Well, if we finally get you the gold record, maybe we can give them the replica of your gold record or something like that.
Or shit, I'll give them a free download of one of the songs.
All right. Oh, that works too.
I'll give them a Alice Cooper book that another friend of mine wrote, or
okay.
Casino Royale. No, I won't give them that. That's too good. But there's all kinds of stuff to reward people. But there's super fans out there, and there's super fans that are older that might know some of the stuff that line up with what I'm talking about as far as in the old days and GNR's childhood, and then there's people that are way younger that weren't born when any of this stuff was happening, that I'm just worried that they'll get the wrong idea about everything if they don't get the stories at least sort of spelled out a little more. It's like I listen to the Chris Webber version of what you guys did a while ago, and, he had some points too about the way things were, and he's coming from a whole different side of Hollywood, than I, but just the way that the scene was at that point was so different, and pre-internet and pre this and pre that, everything was really super divided and segmented, and so for kids got it so easy these days.
I know. I get it. As someone who was born in '83, sorry. I trust me. I do get it. I do get it.
But we used to have to make our own black T-shirts with a Sharpie, and like you can go to Hot Topic, buy whatever you want these days. It's like stuff like that just seems. But there's plenty of more stories, even when talking about to the guys in the original, the Mark Cantor's book, he did a film sort of segment of the book back then when it was out, and it was only, you know, specific subscribers could see it. And it was just little short interviews with a few.
Sure. We got next time we got to talk about Monster Magnet. There's a lot of things. So
yeah, that stuff is like you know, I just figured that they wanted the wacky stories about the crazy times in Hollywood and all the fights we almost got into, or the shit people threw at us and stuff, and the working for the LA Weekly, and they just didn't want to hear any of that stuff. They were very, you know, it was very calculated to, like, you know, timeline and stuff like that. And then you get the people who just want the debauchery. They want, well, were you in on any of the orgies? Did you date the strippers, and did you, you know, blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, well, that's a whole other side of the story that, you know, you probably shouldn't tell unless it's.
No, your wife may your wife may watch this podcast. I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. No, you not only just the GN'R stuff, but your opinions on things. I feel educated about the guitar. I mean, this was a really fun conversation, Steve, and I hope, like, you know, obviously we get to do it again. Maybe not soon, because this is a conversation that's going to take a lot to digest for people.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe
sooner than later. There might not be much of a later for any of us, you know, the way things are going. So,
well, later this summer, maybe this fall, but I mean, I would love to connect with you
maybe a
again.
Halloween.
Ooh, okay. We got to talk about that.
Just saying.
All right, my favorite holiday. Now I'm excited. All right, so with that being said, and we'll get your opinion on Chinese democracy next time, if you have one.
I don't, but I'll get one. But between now and then, if you want me to.
There you go. All right, so we'll make sure Steve Darrow from Hollywoodrose listens to Chinese democracy, which just sounds so weird as a sentence. So for everybody else, when are you going to see the next episode? Who will the next guest be? Well, in the words of axlrose concerning Chinese democracy, you'll see it. I don't know if soon is the word.